Hey guys, tonight we slip into the soft hum of history, and your dream begins right at the foot of the Colosseum. You stand under a Roman night sky, torches flickering along the weathered arches, and the stone feels older than memory itself. Imagine the hushed silence after the roar of 70,000 voices, so much dust still hanging in the air, as if the crowds might return at any moment. You breathe in the cool Roman night, and somewhere in the distance a fountain trickles, its water drawn from aqueducts that once carried life into the city. Your eyes drift upward and you see the jagged rim of the amphitheater, a bite taken out of history, and you wonder, where did the other half go? Don't worry, you're about to find out. You probably wouldn't survive being dropped into a gladiatorial fight right now though, so let's keep it cozy and observational. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough, write down your location and local time in the comments. I always love knowing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the uneven stones leading to the Colosseum, the moonlight pooling over broken steps. The air carries a faint mineral smell of limestone, dust, and perhaps the ghost of sweat that once drenched this place. Think of it. Construction began under Emperor Vespasian around AD 72, right on the grounds of Nero's decadent lake, where his private palace once sprawled with golden halls and a statue of himself the size of a skyscraper. The people of Rome were given a public gift instead, an arena for games. Historians still argue whether this was more a generous gesture or a brilliant distraction tactic after the chaos of Nero's reign. Either way, you can almost feel the propaganda baked into every block of travertine. The first stone, heavy and pale, was laid with the help of slaves, soldiers, and engineers who probably grumbled about the long hours but marveled at the scale. Imagine hauling gigantic blocks from quarries miles away, ropes straining, oxen pulling, and wooden cranes creaking in the midday sun. The Colosseum skeleton rose ring by ring like some impossible wedding cake built from blood, sweat, and mathematics. It stretched into an ellipse 189 meters long, 156 meters wide, and 50 meters tall, enough to make you feel ant-like even as you gaze at its ruin today. You shuffle closer to the outer wall, running your hand along the honeycombed holes in the stone. Those little cavities, they once held iron clamps that tied the blocks together. Over centuries, scavengers yanked them out, leaving the Colosseum pockmarked like a block of Swiss cheese. Quirky fact. During the Middle Ages, people believed the Colosseum was built by sorcery or giants, because no one could fathom ordinary Romans organizing something this massive without supernatural help. Standing here in the cool dark, you might half agree. The night hums with echoes. You close your eyes and hear workmen hammering, chisels sparking against stone, and overseers barking orders in Latin. Dust rises, sticking to sweaty backs, and water jugs pass from hand to hand. Somewhere, a foreman grumbles about missing tools. Maybe a thief swiped a bronze hammer to pawn in a smoky tavern. Ordinary life persisted even under a monument destined for legend. As you circle around, the arches loom overhead. Picture scaffolding wrapped around these same walls, a forest of timber supports that creaked and swayed as construction climbed higher. Rope pulleys groaned under the weight of each block, and workers shouted warnings not to stand underneath dangling loads. It's unsettling to realize how many men probably died in accidents, crushed under stones, forgotten in the sweep of progress. Rome didn't exactly hand out workplace safety awards, and yet, despite sweat and loss, the Colosseum became a symbol of permanence. It was deliberately raised in the heart of the empire, like Rome declaring, "We are unshakable." The irony, of course, is that centuries later you and I are staring at only half a skeleton. You step across a patch of moonlit grass sprouting inside the arena's belly. Imagine standing in this exact spot nearly 2,000 years ago. Vespasian himself likely walked across fresh-laid sand, inspecting his project with a sharp eye. Some scholars think he never saw it fully completed. It was his son Titus who inaugurated the games with 100 days of bloodletting. Still, Vespasian's ghost lingers in these stones. He probably never dreamed the arena would one day be gutted. Its blocks decorating fountains, cathedrals, and private mansions scattered across the eternal city. Even now, in the hush of midnight, you sense the building breathing. Crickets chirp somewhere up in the crumbled tiers, and a stray cat slinks across the ruins, pausing like it knows it's walking history. You can almost laugh at the idea. A structure once filled with elephants, lions, and gladiators now shelters pigeons and tourists with selfie sticks. Time is the funniest comedian. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you remember that weird little rumor about the Colosseum. Medieval folk thought it was haunted, that demons played games under the moon. Local legends spoke of sorcerers using the ruins for rituals, calling upon the lingering blood spilled in the sand. Historians still argue whether such tales were rooted in real clandestine ceremonies or just the wild imaginations of peasants staring up at an empty colossus. Either way, the spook factor is still here. You feel it in the quiet chill running down your spine. You breathe slowly. The night, the stone, the stories, they blend. You understand why writers like Lord Byron and Henry James waxed poetic about this ruin centuries later. They stood in the same silence, letting imagination replace the roar of the crowd. And here you are, still awake, wandering through echoes, waiting for the next turn of history. You shuffle forward, your sandals, or maybe just your sneakers in this dream, scraping over the uneven stone path that leads deeper into the Colosseum's bones. The air smells faintly of earth and time, and you can almost hear the ghostly creak of ropes lifting massive blocks. Tonight you find yourself not as a tourist, but as a worker in the year AD 72, when Emperor Vespasian's project first stirred Rome awake. The foundations stretch out beneath your feet, trenches dug deep into the soil once occupied by Nero's artificial lake. Imagine standing there as engineers measure with wax tablets, surveying rods, and a whole lot of hand gestures. The emperor had ordered this arena as a gift to the people, but more than that, it was revenge against the ghost of Nero's extravagance. By draining the hated emperor's private pond and filling it with a public amphitheater, Vespasian was basically saying, "Forget the tyrant who sang while Rome burned. Look at me. I give you bread, circuses, and a monument that laughs at time." You crouch down in your mind's eye, fingers brushing the first blocks of travertine being laid. Each weighed several tons, dragged all the way from Tivoli quarries about 20 miles away. Teams of oxen strained along wooden rollers, and if one beast gave up, the whole line groaned. Some quirky detail here. Roman engineers sometimes smeared pig fat on the rollers to make the stones slide easier. History's first industrial-strength cooking spray. And yes, it must have smelled awful in the heat. The workers chant as they pull, their voices low and steady, like a song binding them against the crushing weight. You look up and see scaffolding rising, layer upon layer, a forest of timber lashed together with hemp ropes. Cranes creak as pulleys lift stone high into place. Historians still argue whether human tread wheels powered those cranes, like massive hamster wheels for unlucky laborers, or if oxen trudged in circles, snorting dust with every step. Either way, you probably wouldn't want that job, unless you had a fondness for vertigo and sore calves. The emperor himself visits occasionally, flanked by guards, his presence equal parts inspiring and terrifying. Picture him in a plain toga, unlike Nero's flashy gold-stitched robes, because Vespasian wanted to be seen as a soldier's emperor. He squints at the construction, nods, and mutters something to his aide. Maybe he's thinking of the debt he's inherited, maybe of how long the stone will outlast him. A joke slips into your head. He might also have been wondering how many bathroom breaks all these workers were sneaking while pretending to fetch water. At night, the site glows with torches. The pounding of hammers fades, and workers sprawl on the ground, eating barley porridge and salted fish. You imagine lying beside them, staring up at the half-built arches silhouetted against the stars. Did they know they were making history? Probably not, they just hoped payday wouldn't be late. Quirky tidbit. Roman laborers sometimes scratched graffiti on the stones mid-construction, leaving doodles of gladiators, ships, or their names. So if you ever feel like modern workers wasting time on social media, trust me, procrastination is timeless. As weeks turn into years, the elliptical skeleton rises. The amphitheater's footprint sprawls like a giant eye gazing up at the heavens. Every block locked into place with iron clamps. Every archway designed not just for strength, but for beauty. Roman architects knew exactly how to make stone appear both delicate and indestructible, a balance you feel even in the ruins. Yet danger lurked at every stage. You hear a shout, the snap of rope, and the sudden crash of stone hitting ground. Dust clouds your view, workers cough, and someone doesn't get up. There were no insurance payouts, no safety nets. Life was cheap, but the monument demanded sacrifice. Historians still argue how many lives the Colosseum consumed before the games even began. When dawn breaks, sunlight pours over the structure, bouncing off pale travertine like a giant lantern. Rome's skyline shifts. Merchants, senators, and slaves pass by and stop to gape. Children tug at their mothers' sleeves, pointing at the towering arches. What is it, they ask? And the answer is simple: the promise of bread and spectacle, power and permanence. Stone made into theater. You wander around the outer rim in your imagination, brushing your hands against fresh carved columns. They still smell faintly of dust and iron. Somewhere in the crowd, a seller hawks bread to hungry workers. Another peddles cheap wine in clay cups. Even in its making, the Colosseum already spun an economy of its own, and you, standing in this twilight between centuries, realize you're witnessing a statement carved into the earth. The first stone isn't just stone. It's Rome stamping its bootprint into eternity. And like all grand beginnings, it's easy to forget how fragile it was, built on strained backs, short lives, and the hope that an emperor's gesture could be immortal. The torches flicker, the scaffolding groans, and you feel history move another step closer to spectacle. You keep wandering through the dim corridors, your footsteps soft against worn stone, and the air feels heavier now, like a weight of expectation hangs in these arches. You've seen the first blocks laid, the scaffolding swaying, the emperor squinting with ambition. Now, you arrive at the moment when this enormous skeleton finally comes alive as a gift to the people. And oh, what a gift it was, though gift in Rome always came wrapped with strings. Imagine you're a Roman citizen, sandals dusty, tunic patched, and your family's stomach rumbling. Suddenly news spreads across the city. Vespasian and his son Titus are opening the grand amphitheater. Not some rickety wooden structure like before, but a monument of stone standing where Nero once strutted. This isn't just entertainment. It's a political move so loud, you can still hear the echo tonight. Historians still argue whether the Colosseum was meant more as payback to Nero's memory or as a clever bribe to keep the people distracted from high taxes and political maneuvering. Either way, if you lived in Rome, you'd probably be grateful enough to ignore the details. You shuffle with the crowd, the smell of sweat, garlic, and excitement thicken the air. Tens of thousands surge forward, tickets in hand. Yes, Romans had little pottery shards with seating instructions scratched on them. And just like today's concerts, scalpers prowled the lines. One quirky tidbit: Roman graffiti has been found joking about fake tickets being sold outside the Colosseum. Some poor soul probably had to explain to his wife why their whole family didn't get in. The gates swing open and you step inside. Marble staircases gleam, archways funnel the crowd, and the sound of thousands of sandals slapping against stone builds into a thunderous heartbeat. You're carried upward, pulled by the energy of the mob, and suddenly the arena opens before you like the inside of the sun. The floor is golden sand. The seats rise tier upon tier, a perfect ellipse with awnings stretched above to shield you from the glare. They're made of canvas, called the velarium, and sailors, yes, actual naval sailors, man the ropes to shift the giant sheets with the wind. You shade your eyes, squinting at the vast space, and you realize you're inside Rome's propaganda machine. Every block of marble says, "The emperor cares about you." Every trumpet blast whispers, "Rome is eternal." Emperor Titus sits in his box, dressed in flowing purple, trying not to look too smug. He's the son of Vespasian, carrying his father's vision to life. To inaugurate the Colosseum in AD 80, Titus announces 100 days of games. You might cheer at that number, until you remember it means 100 days of blood. Thousands of gladiators fight, exotic animals die by the hundreds, and executions are woven in between. But the people roar their approval. Bread is handed out, wine flows, and for once, the poor of Rome feel like royalty, gazing down at spectacles only gods should witness. You smell the iron tang of blood mixing with roasted meat from vendors in the stands. You hear the clash of steel, the cries of wounded men, and the roar of the crowd rising higher than the trumpets. You laugh softly at the irony. The Colosseum, Rome's biggest gift, runs on death. Like giving someone a birthday present wrapped in fireworks. It's generous but dangerous to stand too close, and yet you can't deny the wonder. The amphitheater has vomitoria, clever passageways that let thousands stream in and out quickly. Modern stadiums still borrow that design. The Romans were masters of crowd control long before TikTok mobs existed. Somewhere nearby, a philosopher shakes his head, muttering that all this spectacle distracts people from deeper truths. But his words are drowned in applause as a gladiator swings his sword in a dramatic flourish. The emperor raises his hand and the crowd's eyes follow, breath held in unison. Life or death depends on a single thumb gesture. And you, sitting among them, realize how intoxicating power feels when it's wrapped in theater. Quirky fact for you. Some historians believe Titus staged mock naval battles here by flooding the arena floor. Others argue the underground chambers would have made that impossible. Historians still argue whether water truly shimmered in this space, carrying ships and sailors in miniature wars. You glance at the sand and almost swear you hear oars slapping water. Maybe it's just the wind brushing through the arches. As night falls after the inaugural day, torches flare, illuminating tired faces smeared with ash and wine. You trudge back into the streets, your ears still buzzing from the cheers. And as you pass Nero's old ruins nearby, you can't help but think, the Colosseum has replaced him, body and soul. Rome no longer whispers about a mad emperor who played his lyre while fire consumed the city. Instead, it dreams of games, marble, and a gift that binds emperor and people together, at least for now. The arches glow in the torchlight, and you sigh. The gift is beautiful, terrifying, and unforgettable. And somehow, you know that this building, even half gone, will still be here long after your sandals turn to dust. You settle deeper into the stone corridors, the air turning warmer as if the memories themselves are still smoldering. The Colosseum has become more than a promise. It's now the stage where Rome flexes its muscles, and tonight you find yourself right in the middle of the blood and sand. The crowd's roar rolls over you like thunder, rattling the arches, making the marble seats tremble beneath your feet. You slip into the stands, squeezing past men in tunics, matrons fanning themselves with scraps of cloth, and kids craning their necks just to glimpse the action. Below, the arena floor glows gold in the sun. Sand is freshly raked to cover the stains from yesterday, though you and everyone else know it won't stay clean for long. Then it begins. Trumpets blaw, gates creak open, and from the shadowed tunnels, gladiators stride into the light. They wear helmets shaped like fish, visors shaped like grills, or crests that gleam like fire. Their weapons vary: nets, tridents, swords, shields, each match designed as a chessboard of styles. You lean forward, heart racing, though you're only dreaming this scene. Imagine standing in their place, muscles tense, sweat running down your arms, thousands of eyes fixed on you. You probably wouldn't survive 5 seconds. But for them, this was career, gamble, and possible freedom. A mainstream fact: gladiators weren't always slaves. Some were volunteers, thrill seekers, or desperate men chasing fame. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists found graffiti in Pompeii showing fangirl-style scribbles about gladiators. Crescens, the net fighter, is the delight of the girls. Yes, they were the sports celebrities of their day, complete with groupies and gossip. The clash begins. Swords ring against shields, tridents stab at air, nets whip through dust. The crowd swells with every strike. "Hit him! Finish it!" they shout, voices rising like a single beast hungry for blood. You imagine the sound echoing off the stone, louder than any rock concert you've been to. And above it all, the emperor sits calm, one hand ready to decide fate with a twitch of thumb. You shiver as a fighter goes down, sand clinging to his bloodied skin. He raises his arm, begging mercy. The crowd debates, hands waving, voices clashing. Some cry for death, others for mercy. The emperor listens, then gestures. Thumbs up or down. It's one of history's most famous symbols, though historians still argue whether it actually meant what we think. Was thumb down mercy or death? Was it sideways? The truth is lost, but the tension is real enough to make your heart ache. The victor raises his arms, sweat pouring, chest heaving, and the crowd explodes with joy. You smell roasted nuts, spilled wine, and the metallic sting of blood all mingling in the air. You hear children laugh, vendors shout, gamblers groan as coins change hands. It's a festival, a fairground, and a battlefield rolled into one. Between matches, exotic performances keep the mood alive. Maybe a condemned criminal is dressed as a mythological figure and sent to die in a theatrical execution. Heracles strangled by lions, Icarus thrown from heights. Quirky detail: one recorded punishment involved a man dressed as Orpheus being mauled by a bear. Dark humor, Roman style. The games aren't only about men either. Sometimes women fought in the arena, shocking the crowd. Imagine the gasp of an audience seeing a noblewoman take up a sword against another. Historians still argue whether these female gladiators were common or rare publicity stunts. Either way, it proved Rome's appetite for spectacle had no limits. The sun blazes overhead. You shield your eyes, glancing at the velarium, that giant canvas awning shifting like sails above the amphitheater. Sailors tug ropes, adjusting for the wind, casting shifting patches of shade over the crowd. You chuckle at the thought. Some poor guy probably got stuck under a leak during a sudden rain shower and spent hours watching blood and guts while dripping wet. History never spares everyone equally. As the day drags on, the sand turns redder. The crowd's roars become hoarse, throats dry from cheering. Vendors shout louder, children grow restless, but still no one leaves. The Colosseum is doing its job. Dazzling, distracting, uniting, terrifying. You feel yourself lulled by the rhythm of combat, almost hypnotized by the swirl of dust and light. And then, silence. A gladiator kneels, wounded but alive. The emperor rises, and the whole stadium holds its breath. Time itself seems to freeze as his hand lifts. You lean forward, straining, your heartbeat echoing with thousands around you. Will he live? Will he die? The decision falls, the crowd erupts, and history moves on. As night approaches, torches flare again. Gladiators limp back through shadowed gates, some alive, some not. The sand is raked once more, the blood covered, the day forgotten, or maybe just buried. You sit there weary and awestruck, realizing the Colosseum isn't just stone. It's a living beast, fed by Rome's hunger for power and distraction. The stars blink above the arches. You exhale, eyes heavy, and still, beneath the roar fading into memory, you sense that this place will never truly fall silent. You lean your elbows on the warm marble railing, gazing down at the arena floor that now shimmers under the afternoon sun. You think you've seen enough blood, but Rome hasn't finished surprising you. Today, the Colosseum unleashes creatures from every corner of the empire. Beasts hauled across deserts, mountains, and seas just to die in the sand. The gates groan open again and the crowd hushes in anticipation. From the shadowy tunnels, a lion pads forward, golden mane blazing like fire against the pale sand. Its roar echoes off the walls, sending a shiver down your spine. A second gate clangs, and suddenly a bear lumbers out, drool glistening on its snout. The crowd gasps, then erupts in cheers. You realize this isn't just a fight between men anymore. It's the empire itself putting the whole natural world on stage. Romans called these spectacles venationes, beast hunts. They weren't simply about survival. They were theater, demonstrations of Rome's power to command even nature. Quirky fact, elephants from Africa, tigers from India, and even crocodiles from the Nile were shipped here, shoved into cages, and paraded before the roaring masses. Historians still argue how logistically insane it must have been. How many handlers, how much food, how many ships were needed just to bring one cranky rhino across the sea. You picture sailors steering creaking vessels loaded with cages, lions pacing inside, monkeys screeching, and maybe a very seasick giraffe swaying with the waves. By the time they arrived, the animals were half mad, confused, and ready to lash out. Perfect ingredients for Roman entertainment. Down on the sand, hunters called bestiarii stride forward, armed with spears, nets, or even bows. They circle the lion cautiously. Dust swirls as claws scrape stone. The crowd holds its breath, then gasps as the first spear is thrown. The animal roars, charging, and chaos erupts. You can almost hear the crack of bones, the clash of weapons, the cries of men and beasts alike. And through it all, the people cheer louder, as though domination of wild nature is proof Rome will never fall. The emperor beams, pleased. For him, each animal killed is not just a spectacle, but a reminder that Rome's reach extends across continents. And the people? They leave feeling both terrified and reassured. If lions fall here, what chance does a barbarian tribe have? You wrinkle your nose at the stench. Blood mixes with fur, sweat, and dung, carried up by the warm air. Imagine the smell of an entire menagerie let loose in one place. And if the fights weren't gruesome enough, some animals were killed not by men, but by each other. Bears against bulls, lions against tigers, even dogs trained to tear apart panthers. It was chaos, choreographed for applause. Quirky tidbit. There are records of ostriches being released and Roman nobles trying to decapitate them with curved swords. The birds sprinted around the arena, heads bobbing comically as the crowd laughed. A surreal mix of horror and slapstick, reminding you that Romans found amusement in things modern audiences might call nightmare fuel. The velarium above flutters, sailors tugging ropes as the sun shifts. You wipe imaginary sweat from your forehead, feeling the heat of midday Rome. Vendors pass clay cups of watered wine, roasted nuts and honey cakes through the stands. Children squeal as a leopard leaps, clawing at the walls before being dragged down by spearmen. You almost want to cover their eyes, but this is Rome. Childhood included blood sports. In the corner of the arena, exotic animals are sometimes displayed before the killing begins. You imagine a giraffe stretching its neck high, gazing at the arches like it can't believe it's been dragged into this madness. Or a hippo wallowing in an artificial pool while the crowd points and laughs. Historians still argue whether some of these animals were meant to be permanent exhibits or just doomed novelties for a day's show. The games roll on. Lions roar, men scream, horns blare. The crowd surges like a wave. And you? You're left dizzy, overwhelmed by the sheer noise and color. It's too much, yet you understand why Romans loved it. These spectacles weren't about cruelty alone. They were about power, identity, and control. They were Rome reminding itself that nothing was beyond its grasp, not even the wilderness. The sun tilts westward, shadows lengthening across the sand now stained crimson. The last beast collapses, spears bristling from its hide. Trumpets sound. The crowd roars, a sea of hands thrust into the air. You can almost taste the dust kicked up by the frenzy. As night creeps closer, the beasts are dragged away, their bodies hauled back through the gates. Workers shovel fresh sand over the gore, preparing for tomorrow. And the people? They shuffle home, chattering excitedly about the leopard that leapt, the lion that roared, the ostrich that bobbed comically before losing its head. To them, it was a day well spent, proof once again that Rome ruled all corners of the world, even the untamed. You lean back against the cool stone, your heartbeat slowly calming. The Colosseum is no longer just an arena of men. It's a zoo, a battlefield, and a theater rolled into one. And somewhere inside, you sense a whisper. This monument will outlive all the beasts, all the men, and even the emperors who built it. You slide your hand along the worn edge of the railing and feel the faint grooves where centuries of fingers once rested. The crowd has gone quiet in your imagination, the beasts dragged off, the gladiators limping back into tunnels. But the Colosseum itself still hums with hidden life. Tonight, you step behind the stage and glimpse what made this building an engineering marvel far beyond mere stone and sand. Beneath the arena floor stretches a labyrinth, the Hippodrome, a two-level network of tunnels, chambers and cages. You crouch in your mind's eye, torch in hand, walking through these underground passages. The smell is a mix of damp stone, animal musk, and iron. Here, slaves wait in the shadows, tugging on ropes, preparing pulleys, oiling gears. This place is the backstage of Rome's grandest theater, and the machinery clanks like a living beast. Mainstream fact, the Colosseum was fitted with dozens of elevators and trapdoors. Lions could be raised suddenly from below, gladiators could appear as if by magic, and whole sets could be swapped in minutes. Picture sailors turned stagehands heaving on winches, sweat dripping, muscles straining as cages rise on wooden platforms. Above, the crowd gasps as a leopard bursts into the arena out of nowhere. Quirky tidbit. There's evidence that stage designers used painted backdrops and even fake trees that popped up from trapdoors to create little forests for beast hunts. You can almost laugh at the thought. Rome's first pop-up book, only with more mauling. You climb the narrow stairs back up into the light, imagining the colossal canvas roof overhead. The velarium was no small feat. It shaded 2/3 of the crowd. Historians still argue exactly how it was rigged, since supporting such a massive awning required brilliant rope work. Some suggest Roman sailors, skilled with sails and rigging, were permanently stationed at the Colosseum just to manage the canopy. A gust of wind could turn the thing into the world's largest kite, and you probably wouldn't want to be sitting under that. The seating plan itself was an architectural masterpiece. You glance around at the tiers curving in perfect symmetry. The vomitoria, the passageways, allowed thousands to enter and exit in minutes. If you've ever been stuck in a stadium parking lot after a concert, you'll know how miraculous that design feels. The Romans solved crowd flow 2,000 years before modern engineers tried to. But what really sets the Colosseum apart is how adaptable it was. The arena floor could be swapped from sand to wooden planks, from a hunting ground to a stage for mock naval battles. Historians still argue whether full-scale sea fights actually happened here, or whether that's just ancient exaggeration. Either way, you imagine standing in the stands, watching as water gushes in, flooding the arena. Ships bob into view, sailors shout commands, and the crowd gasps. All of it orchestrated by pumps, sluices, and the quiet labor of hundreds below your feet. You pause, tilting your head at the arches. The Colosseum skeleton is concrete, a Roman invention that still baffles scientists today. Their blend of volcanic ash, lime, and seawater made it stronger with age. That's right. The concrete actually grows sturdier over centuries. Meanwhile, you've probably seen modern sidewalks crumble in a decade. Rome would be rolling its eyes. Another quirky tidbit: inscriptions suggest engineers occasionally staged elevator mishaps for comedy, letting props pop up crooked or animals tumble out awkwardly. Imagine a bear appearing sideways, landing in a heap while the crowd bursts into laughter. Even accidents were entertainment. As you walk, you notice how every stone, every arch, every stair is shaped with both strength and spectacle in mind. The Colosseum wasn't just functional, it was designed to impress. Even the numbered seating carved into marble told visitors they mattered, that their place in Rome's grand machine was set. Senators sat in the best seats, of course, but even the poor had space. Everyone belonged here, from emperor to beggar, under one canopy of noise and dust. The sun slants across the arches, and you feel the brilliance of it all. This wasn't just an arena, it was a machine of propaganda powered by architecture. The engineering wasn't hidden backstage. It was part of the performance. The scale alone reminded every spectator that Rome could bend the world to its will, not just with armies, but with pulleys, cranes, and concrete. You run your fingers along the pitted walls, tracing holes where bronze clamps once held blocks together. Thieves stole them centuries later, but even stripped, the structure endures. You realize the Colosseum isn't half standing by accident. It was overbuilt, fortified like a fortress, a piece of engineering meant to defy time itself. Above, the awning ripples in your imagination. Below, slaves sweat in the darkness. Around you, arches frame blue sky like paintings. And you, perched in the middle of it all, marvel at the genius that turned stone and sand into Rome's most enduring machine. You step higher up the marble tiers now, your sandals clicking softly against stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The sun slips lower, shadows stretching like fingers across the ellipse. And you begin to notice how carefully the seats wrap around the arena. This wasn't chaos. This was social engineering carved into stone. Rome didn't just build a theater. It built a mirror of its society. From the emperor's cushioned box, everything spiraled outward like ripples in a pond. Closest to the sand were senators and noble families, their seats carved from gleaming marble, broad enough for comfort. You can almost picture their jeweled rings glinting as they gesture arrogantly, whispering judgments while sipping wine. Behind them sat the equestrian class, Rome's wealthy businessmen and officials, enjoying their own prestige but just far enough back to know their place. Climb higher, and you reach the common citizens, farmers, artisans, shopkeepers. Their benches were narrower, harder, and the view a little worse, but still they cheered as if they ruled the empire. Higher still, packed at the top under the scorching sun, were women, slaves, and foreigners, those whose voices mattered least in politics but still counted for noise in the crowd. Historians still argue whether some women of higher status were allowed closer seats, but the general rule was clear. The higher your station, the lower you sat. Rome never let you forget your rank, not even at a show. You shuffle into a seat halfway up, feeling the heat radiating from stone. The benches are hard, and you shift uncomfortably. Quirky fact: spectators sometimes brought cushions, snacks, and even small umbrellas. Imagine juggling all that while elbowing for space in a crowd of 50,000. Complaining about modern stadium seating suddenly feels spoiled. Look around. The vomitoria, those wide passageways, allow people to flow in and out without bottlenecks. Whole sections could empty in minutes. Even the seating arrangement was engineered like clockwork, each arch labeled with Roman numerals to guide you to your spot. You glance at the carved numbers above a gate and smirk. It's basically the world's first ticketing system, long before QR codes and turnstiles. As the crowd fills in, you notice the subtle choreography. Senators arrive last, gliding past guards into their cushioned seats, soaking in the envious stares. Vendors snake up and down the stairways, balancing trays of bread, olives, and watered wine. Children chase each other until a harried mother smacks them back into place. And in the nosebleeds, foreigners marvel at the scale, whispering in strange tongues. The Colosseum gathers all of Rome into one bowl, but carefully keeps them sorted like ingredients in a recipe. Then, the trumpets blare. A hush falls as the emperor rises. From your perch, you see heads turn in unison, eyes fixed on his gesture. One hand lifted and 50,000 bodies lean forward together, breath held. The Colosseum doesn't just separate Rome by class. It unites them in awe. Everyone, rich and poor, slave and free, becomes part of one roaring beast the moment the games begin. Quirky tidbit. Archaeologists have found traces of lead pipes under the seating, part of a plumbing system that may have sprayed perfume into the air. Picture it, after a bloody fight, clouds of rose water drifting over sweaty, smelly crowds. A primitive air freshener, centuries before Fabrizi. Historians still argue whether this was common practice or just occasional imperial showing off. But the thought of senators sniffing lavender mist while lions mauled gladiators below is equal parts surreal and hilarious. The sun sets, shadows deepen, and torches flare along the arches. The seating tiers glow in flickering light, each row stacked higher, each face turned inward. You realize this wasn't just entertainment. This was Rome's social order written in stone, visible every time the crowd gathered. Sit where you belong, cheer with your kind, and remember who controls life and death in the arena. You lean back, stretching your legs, gazing at the stars beginning to prick the sky above. The marble is cold now, and your breath fogs slightly in the evening chill. Around you, thousands murmur, laugh, or shout, their voices blending into a low hum that feels almost like the Colosseum itself is breathing. And you, perched halfway up, sense the genius in the design. Not just the arches and vaults, but the way the building itself reminds every Roman who they are, where they belong, and how fleeting their cheers might be. The arena isn't only about spectacle, it's a lesson disguised as entertainment. You linger in your seat as the last streaks of daylight fade, torches casting orange halos across the stone. The crowd buzzes, restless after the beasts and gladiators. Tonight isn't only about fighting, it's about empire, about rulers reminding their people why loyalty should never falter. You glance toward the imperial box, its marble balustrades gleaming in the firelight, and sense that this section of the Colosseum wasn't built for games at all. It was built as a stage for power. Emperors sat here like directors of the grandest play. Picture Titus, Domitian, or later emperors lounging in silk-trimmed togas, surrounded by guards and whispering advisors. Every move mattered. A smile to the crowd. Cheers thunder. A hand raised? Silence falls like a curtain. The Colosseum gave rulers a microphone louder than any Senate speech. And the message was simple. Rome feeds you, entertains you, and holds your fate in its hands. Bread and circuses, panem et circenses, the phrase later coined to describe exactly this. Keep bellies full and eyes dazzled, and politics fade into background noise. The people might grumble about taxes or war, but when lions leap onto gladiators, complaints vanish in the roar of spectacle. Historians still argue whether the games were truly beloved by all or tolerated because they came with free food and wine. You probably know the answer. If Netflix came with free pizza, you'd stop questioning it. 2. Quirky tidbit. Emperors sometimes released birds into the crowd, each carrying a little ribbon promising gifts like coins or bread. Imagine catching a pigeon midair and realizing it's basically handing you a coupon for free groceries. Propaganda has never been so feathery. The spectacles escalated when emperors needed distraction most. After disasters, plagues, or military losses, games were held longer, bloodier, flashier. A flood in the provinces? Here's 100 lions. A rebellion crushed? Enjoy a week of executions disguised as mythological plays. You see the pattern. Violence packaged as entertainment to soothe an uneasy empire. You glance around at the crowd. 50,000 people united in awe. Senators lean forward with wine-stained lips. Merchants shout bets. Children clap sticky hands. Even slaves are allowed to cheer. Everyone's eyes are fixed on the arena, not the political scheming happening elsewhere. The Colosseum works exactly as intended. One scene plays out in your imagination. The emperor rises, holding out his hand. A criminal, dressed as a mythic figure, is dragged into the arena. Torches blaze brighter, musicians strike up a tense rhythm. Suddenly a trapdoor bursts open and a lion bounds forward. The crowd gasps, then cheers as the staged myth ends in blood. The emperor watches calmly, knowing each scream reinforces his power. You smirk at the thought of modern leaders trying this. Imagine a politician solving a budget crisis by announcing a weekend of bear versus gladiator battles. It wouldn't fly today, but in Rome it was genius. Or terrifying. Maybe both. As the night deepens, torches flicker against the emperor's face. Shadows make him look taller, sterner, untouchable. The Colosseum amplifies his presence, making one man appear larger than life to 50,000. And you, sitting halfway up the stands, realize the building wasn't designed just to hold people. It was designed to hold loyalty. The trumpets sound again. Another wave of games begins, and the emperor's hand rises like a conductor's baton. At that moment, the entire city breathes as one, following his lead. You sense the propaganda sinking deeper than words, deeper than law. This is theater woven into the bones of Rome. Quirky detail. Some records suggest emperors occasionally staged mock sea monsters by crafting giant mechanical beasts hauled into the arena. Picture a wooden whale wobbling on wheels while sailors pretended to harpoon it. The crowd roared anyway. It didn't matter if it was fake. Rome understood spectacle long before CGI. The stars scatter across the sky. The torches flicker low, and you lean back against the cold marble. The Colosseum's walls loom above you like a halo of stone, glowing against the night. You realize this place isn't just entertainment. It's Rome's greatest stage for imperial theater, where bread and circuses buy silence, loyalty and awe. And as your eyes grow heavy, you whisper to yourself that even ruins can still echo power. Because in this arena, every cheer was a promise, every scream a reminder, and every silence a debt paid to empire. You stretch your legs along the cold marble bench, letting the torches burn low in your imagination. The Colosseum stands firm for centuries in your dream. Crowds roaring, emperors waving, gladiators clashing. But then, as if Rome itself begins to sigh, the ground shivers. You hear it faintly at first, a low rumble beneath your feet. Then the sound grows, echoing through the arches like some angry god rolling dice with mountains. Earthquakes. The first major quake strikes in the 5th century, long after the empire's golden days have dimmed. Picture the walls groaning, stones shifting, cracks splintering like lightning across the arches. Dust rains down on empty seats, pigeons scatter, and the once invincible arena suddenly feels fragile. A chunk of the outer wall crashes to the ground, shaking the earth. You imagine being a poor local, waking to the sound of stone thunder, wondering if Jupiter himself had decided the games were finally over. Mainstream fact. Rome endured several destructive earthquakes. The worst hitting in 847 and again in 1349. Each tremor ripped more of the Colosseum apart. Quirky tidbit. After one quake, locals scavenged the fallen stones so quickly it was almost like a community festival of looting. If a marble column was lying there, why not roll it down the street to your church or palace? Free home decor, courtesy of Mother Nature. The Colosseum became a victim of its own size. The heavier the stones, the harder they fell. You walk along the base and see jagged scars where blocks once stacked neatly. Arches now gape like broken teeth. Stairways end abruptly in midair. Historians still argue whether engineers tried repairing parts of it or simply accepted collapse as inevitable. Either way, you can see that nature, not barbarians, struck the most damaging blows. Imagine being inside during one of those quakes. The roar of stone splitting, the groan of scaffolding, the screams of those trapped in falling rubble. You'd clutch at the marble bench, heart pounding, as the structure that once symbolized eternity crumbles like a child's toy. You probably wouldn't survive the falling blocks, so it's lucky you're only wandering here in dreams. The quakes didn't destroy the Colosseum all at once. They chipped away piece by piece, century by century, until the building stood like a wounded giant. You tilt your head, picturing the missing southern wall, gone because of tremors centuries ago. What remains today, that familiar jagged half-circle, is basically the skeleton left standing after nature's tantrums. Yet even broken, the Colosseum refused to vanish. People kept coming, climbing over rubble, holding strange ceremonies in its shadow. The ruin itself became part of the city's identity. The cracks were scars, reminders that even Rome could bleed. Quirky note: medieval poets often described the Colosseum as if it were alive. One line went, "As long as the Colosseum stands, so shall Rome." When the Colosseum falls, Rome will fall. Imagine that pressure. Every tremor made people wonder if the end of the world was around the corner. Historians still argue whether anyone genuinely believed this prophecy or if it was just poetic flair. But either way, the ruin haunted imaginations. As centuries roll by in your dream, the arena becomes quieter. Weeds sprout in cracks, owls roost in broken arches, goats wander where emperors once sat. You walk through the silence, hearing only your own breath, and realize that earthquakes didn't just topple stone, they toppled purpose. Without safe walls, no games could be held. The Colosseum shifted from stage of empire to carcass of memory. You run your fingers along a massive crack that snakes through the wall. The stone feels cold, unyielding, yet fragile at the same time. You can almost hear the echo of that first tremor, a sound louder than any gladiatorial cheer. The crowd is gone, the emperor's dust, but the earth still remembers how to shake history loose. And as you step back into the moonlight, you glance at the jagged rim of ruin and whisper to yourself, half the Colosseum didn't vanish by men alone. It was swallowed by the trembling of the ground, as if Rome's own foundations had decided to remind everyone that nothing is eternal. You brush dust from your hands, standing among broken arches that once roared with triumph. The earthquakes have cracked the Colosseum open, but what nature shook loose, people carried away. Tonight you drift into the Middle Ages. When Rome's proud amphitheater wasn't an arena anymore, it was a quarry waiting to be plundered. Imagine walking the streets of 11th century Rome. The empire is long gone, emperors replaced by popes, and the Colosseum just sits there. Massive, wounded and strangely convenient. Need marble for your palace? A block for your church? Why wrestle with distant quarries when the biggest pile of cut stone in Europe is right in the middle of town? Mainstream fact, many Roman monuments vanished this way. The Colosseum's travertine blocks were stripped for palaces, basilicas, even for St. Peter's itself. If you wander through Renaissance churches today, chances are the columns you admire once framed gladiators or lions. Quirky tidbit: masons sometimes carved Christian crosses into the reused stone. Almost like a rebranding exercise. Don't worry, this block is holy now. Ignore the bloodstains. You picture carts rumbling through narrow streets, oxen straining as they drag marble chunks from the Colosseum. Workmen chip iron clamps from the walls, leaving the pockmarks you can still see today. Children scramble after the carts, hoping for loose scraps to play with. It's like the world's strangest recycling program, Rome turning its greatest symbol of empire into everyday bricks and mortar. Historians still argue how organized this plundering was. Some say the papacy officially sanctioned it, granting rights to quarry the Colosseum. Others think locals simply helped themselves, one stone at a time. Either way, the result is the same. The arena shrinks, bleeding block by block into the veins of the city. You wander through the ruin in your mind's eye, stepping over piles of rubble that once were marble steps. The arena floor lies silent, weeds curling through cracks, while men in rough tunics chip away at the walls. They're not thinking of history. They're thinking of wages, survival, maybe a mug of ale at the end of the day. The Colosseum to them isn't sacred, it's just a free hardware store. Quirky fact: some medieval families actually moved into the Colosseum, building shacks against its inner walls, keeping goats inside its arches. Picture smoke curling from a chimney where lions once prowled. For centuries, the Colosseum wasn't a monument. It was a neighborhood. Yet even while stones were stolen, legends grew. Locals whispered about ghosts wandering the ruins at night, about demons lurking in the shadows of broken corridors. You imagine a traveler stumbling through, hearing owls hoot and footsteps echo, and swearing he'd seen a gladiator's ghost sharpening his sword. Historians still argue how much these tales were believed, but they added to the ruins' aura, part quarry, part haunted fortress. By the 12th century, noble families got bold. Some claimed chunks of the Colosseum as their own, walling off sections to turn into fortresses. Arrows bristled from towers built right into the ancient arches. You chuckle at the thought, Rome's most democratic space, once filled with farmers and senators side by side, carved up into medieval real estate like a dilapidated shopping mall. As you wander back into the torchlight, you pause to take it all in. Earthquakes may have broken the Colosseum, but it was people who hollowed it out. Every missing block you see isn't lost. It's just scattered across Rome, holding up palaces, framing altars, paving courtyards. Half the Colosseum didn't vanish. It walked away on carts, rolled down cobbled streets, and became part of a city always hungry for stone. And in that strange irony, the amphitheater never truly disappeared. It just changed shape. Its bones spread like seeds, growing into new monuments across the eternal city. You step softly now, torchlight flickering over arches that feel less like an arena and more like a cathedral. After centuries of scavengers, the Colosseum's role shifts again, not as quarry, not as fortress, but as something strangely holy. Tonight you drift into the medieval moment when priests claimed the ruin, transforming it from Rome's theater of death into a station of salvation. Picture monks winding their way through the broken corridors, chanting prayers that echo against cracked marble. Crosses are planted where emperors once sat. Altars rise in corners once filled with dust and weeds. The arena floor, once a graveyard of gladiators and beasts, is rededicated to Christ. You glance around and realize the Colosseum has become a church without a roof, a holy shell carved by time. Mainstream fact: by the 6th century, parts of the Colosseum were indeed used for Christian worship. A chapel dedicated to St. James appeared within its arches, and by the Middle Ages it was folded into the sacred fabric of Rome. Pilgrims walked here not to watch lions, but to pray. Quirky tidbit: for centuries, locals believed countless Christians had been martyred in the arena, even though historians still argue about how much truth lies in that tradition. Evidence suggests some executions happened here, but the image of mass martyrdom may have been more legend than fact. Still, the story stuck, and you can almost feel the chill of those whispers in the night. You imagine pilgrims arriving dusty and tired, kneeling on cracked steps, weeping as they touched stone they believed soaked with holy blood. They carry candles, their flames trembling against ancient walls scarred with holes where iron once held marble together. You sense their faith mingling with ruins, transforming violence into redemption. Walk a little farther in your dream, and you find the Stations of the Cross erected inside the arena. Each arch becomes a reminder of Christ's passion, and the Colosseum itself turns into a vast reliquary. It's an extraordinary transformation. What once glorified emperors now bows to God. Quirky fact: papal processions eventually made the Colosseum a regular stop, especially during Holy Week. Imagine the Pope himself walking beneath broken arches, torches blazing, chanting, echoing through a structure that once thundered with gladiatorial cheers. The juxtaposition is surreal. Incense curling where smoke once rose from burning sacrifices, hymns where lions once roared, and yet it wasn't pure sanctity. Even as priests prayed, masons still chipped away at the walls for stone, and noble families still eyed the arches for fortifications. The Colosseum straddled two worlds, half church, half construction site. Historians still argue whether the church genuinely sought to preserve it or merely repurpose what remained. But as you stand here in your imagination, the sacred side feels strongest. You hear bells tolling in the distance, mingling with the faint cries of owls nesting in dark corners. You smell incense drifting through the arches, covering the sharper tang of dust and moss. Pilgrims shuffle past you, murmuring prayers in Latin, their candles leaving drops of wax on stone steps. The transformation doesn't erase the blood, though. It overlays it. You sense both layers at once, the ghost of gladiators swinging swords and the solemn chant of monks. The Colosseum becomes a paradox, a sacred ruin that remembers every scream. You lean against a pillar and smile faintly at the irony. Rome built this place to glorify power, to dazzle with death. Centuries later, the church claims it to glorify faith, to sanctify suffering. And here you stand, listening to both voices at once. The roar of lions, the whisper of prayers, and realizing that ruins never stay silent. They simply change their language. You step deeper into the ruin, and the chants fade into the rattle of armor. The Colosseum, no longer just a church or quarry, becomes something stranger still, a fortress. Noble families of medieval Rome look at its massive arches and see not history, not holiness, but prime real estate for power. Picture the 12th century. Rome is divided by rival clans, Frangipani, Annibaldi, and others, locked in endless squabbles for dominance. They need strongholds, and here looms the biggest fortress in town, already built, already thick with stone walls. Why bother constructing castles when the Colosseum is sitting right here like a ready-made fort? Mainstream fact. The Frangipani family seized control of the Colosseum, walling off sections, reinforcing arches, and turning part of the amphitheater into their private castle. Quirky tidbit. Travelers' accounts describe how entire neighborhoods were barred by chains, with drawbridges and battlements built into the ancient structure. Imagine gladiatorial arches stuffed with wooden doors and crossbow slits. Rome's symbol of unity fractured into a playground of feuding nobles. You wander through the dream and hear the clatter of hooves on stone. Guards patrol makeshift towers jutting from the Colosseum's top. Banners flap in the breeze, family crests replacing imperial eagles. Inside, goats graze on weeds while soldiers sharpen blades against the very marble steps where senators once lounged. You smirk at the absurdity. An amphitheater for 50,000 now reduced to a backyard castle for one family. Historians still argue how extensive these fortifications were. Some suggest entire wings were sealed off with brick, transforming sections into walled compounds. Others think the castle was more symbolic, a claim of ownership more than a military stronghold. Either way, the Colosseum was no longer Rome's stage. It was Rome's chessboard, each arch a pawn in family feuds. Quirky note, one medieval document even records disputes over rent inside the Colosseum. Families lived in its shadows, goats chewed grass where gladiators once bled, and people squabbled about who owed whom a few coins. Imagine a landlord's letter reading, "Failure to pay means eviction from arch number 27. As night deepens in your imagination, you hear shouts of rival families echoing through broken corridors. Arrows clatter, torches flare, stone chips fall as someone hammers shut a doorway. The Colosseum creaks like an old giant pressed into service it was never meant for. You realize it has changed masks again, from theater to church to fortress. Each role less glorious than the last, but each proof that Rome refuses to let anything go unused. And yet, through the din of quarrels and bleeding goats, the arena still feels enormous. Even in partial ruin, it dwarfs the families trying to bend it to their will. You lean against a wall patched with rough medieval bricks and think of the irony. The Frangipani family may have claimed the Colosseum, but really, it claimed them, pulling them into its endless story, making their petty wars just another footnote in the shadow of stone. The torches gutter in the wind, shadows stretch across the broken tiers, and you whisper to yourself, once the Colosseum belonged to emperors, now to feuding nobles. Tomorrow, someone else will claim it, but the ruin endures indifferent, swallowing every ambition into its arches. You brush past a cracked archway, and the echoes of feuding nobles fade. The Colosseum stands quieter now, but not untouched. Its fate in the Renaissance is neither stage nor fortress. It becomes quite literally a quarry in plain sight. Picture 15th century Rome, churches rising, palaces expanding, fountains bubbling into piazzas. Marble, travertine, and limestone are in high demand, and quarrying fresh stone from Tivoli is expensive. Why bother when the city already owns the world's largest stone warehouse sitting abandoned in the center? The Colosseum, once a marvel of engineering, becomes Rome's cheapest home depot. Mainstream fact. Pope Nicholas V in the mid-1400s authorized stripping the Colosseum to build St. Peter's Basilica and other projects. Entire wagons of stone rolled away from the amphitheater to construct the holiest site in Christendom. Quirky tidbit. Documents record masons hauling away iron clamps by melting them out of the walls, leaving behind the honeycombed pockmarks you can still trace with your fingertips today. The Colosseum became not just a ruin, but a mine slowly dismantled from the inside out. You wander through in your imagination and hear hammers clanging, chisels biting into marble, and mule carts squeaking under the weight of stolen history. Workers shout, dust clouds rise, and chips of travertine tumble down like crumbs from a giant loaf. You picture men in sweat-stained tunics joking about how many churches they could build with one more block pride. Loose. Historians still argue whether the papacy ever considered preserving the Colosseum at this point, or whether its fate as a donor skeleton for Renaissance Rome was sealed without hesitation. Some popes called it sacred, others saw it as raw material. The contradictions are almost comical. One week praying for Christian martyrs, the next week carting away their supposed altar stones to frame new windows. Walk farther in your dream and you notice scaffolding, not for shows, but for demolition. The amphitheater's grand arches are braced with wood while masons chip away, lowering blocks with ropes. It looks less like ruin and more like surgery. History dismantled piece by piece. Quirky fact: fragments of Colosseum marble show up in fountains across Rome. Yes, those same lion-headed spouts gushing water may have once stared down gladiators. Next time someone tossed a coin into a Renaissance fountain, they were wishing on recycled arena stone. As the Renaissance city flourished, the Colosseum shrank. Its bones scattered into palaces like Palazzo Venezia, into basilicas like St. Peter's, into countless doorsteps and staircases you might casually walk across today. The amphitheater didn't just fade, it migrated, spreading itself into the veins of Rome's rebirth. You lean against a cracked pillar in your imagination and think, half the Colosseum isn't lost, it's just hiding in plain sight. Every time you admire a church facade or a marble fountain, you're seeing pieces of the arena repurposed. It's like Rome cannibalized its past to feed its future, leaving behind only the husk that greets you now. The evening grows cooler. You hear footsteps fade, hammers still echoing faintly in the distance. A cat slinks across a rubble-strewn stair, pausing to lick its paw where senators once paraded. The Colosseum is quieter now, but you realize it never stopped working. It simply changed trades. No longer theater or church or fortress, it became a supplier, feeding stone to a city hungry for beauty, and as you exhale into the night, you murmur to yourself, even in ruin, the Colosseum kept building Rome. You wander on through the cool night, and the hammer strikes fade into silence. By now the Colosseum is half vanished, yet it has one more curious fate, caught in the tug-of-war of the papacy itself. Popes, standing as both guardians of the past and builders of the future, had to decide. Was this ruin to be preserved as sacred memory or gutted for stone to glorify God? Mainstream fact: in the 16th and 17th centuries, papal policy toward the Colosseum swung like a pendulum. One pope might declare it holy ground, another might sign permits to plunder it further. Pope Sixtus V, for instance, seriously considered converting the arena into a wool factory, thousands of looms whirring where gladiators once fought. Quirky tidbit: his death in 1590 killed the idea, leaving Rome to wonder whether the Colosseum had just dodged its strangest career change ever. Imagine history books describing the world's grandest amphitheater as that old textile mill. You picture masons still chipping at stone while priests hold processions under arches. The contradictions are surreal. Incense wafting through scaffolding, rosaries clinking beside chisels. Historians still argue whether this duality was hypocrisy or simply practical Roman resourcefulness. Prayer on one side, construction materials on the other. Wander into your imagination further, and you stumble into a papal meeting. Advisors murmur, the Colosseum is a symbol of Christian martyrs. Another counters, yes, but St. Peter's needs columns, and marble doesn't grow on trees. The Pope leans back, sighs, and decides according to the needs of the week. You can almost laugh at the image. Theology and logistics sharing the same coffee table. By the 18th century, however, attitudes shifted. Pope Benedict XIV consecrated the Colosseum as a site of martyrdom, banning further quarrying. He even installed stations of the cross around the arena, reasserting its role as holy ground. Quirky fact: pilgrims could walk in silence through the same arches once deafened by gladiatorial roars, murmuring prayers at each stop. The ruin became a monument of faith again, frozen between reverence and decay. Still, even with papal decrees, locals couldn't resist. People quietly stole stones at night, prying loose blocks for staircases and doorsteps. You imagine a mason slipping home with a chunk of marble hidden under his cloak, muttering, "It's for the glory of God, and maybe my courtyard." The Colosseum continued to bleed, sanctioned or not. You pause in your dream and glance at the jagged rim silhouetted against the stars. The amphitheater now feels like a tired giant pulled in too many directions. Emperors used it for propaganda, nobles for power, masons for material, and popes for faith. Each era tried to claim it, yet none completely owned it. Historians still argue whether papal attempts at preservation saved the Colosseum from total erasure. If not for Benedict XIV's decree, perhaps only a handful of scattered stones would remain. And you wouldn't be wandering here tonight at all. You'd just be staring at a few inscriptions and wondering where the rest went. As you walk beneath the arches, torchlight flickering, you sense the ruin's exhaustion. It has been everything: arena, quarry, church, fortress, factory that almost was. The papacy's dilemma left it in limbo, half protected, half plundered. And maybe that's why half still stands today, caught between reverence and utility, sacredness and survival. You lean back against a cold wall and whisper into the silence. Sometimes a building lives not by preservation, but by indecision. You lean your shoulder against the cool stone, and the whispers of popes fade into softer murmurs. The Colosseum is quiet now, broken yet standing, and its story takes on another layer: the myth of the martyrs. For centuries, people told and retold the tale that countless Christians were slaughtered here, their blood soaking the sand. Whether true or not, the legend shaped how the ruin was remembered. Mainstream fact: early Christian writers did record that some believers were executed in Rome, but specific evidence tying mass martyrdom directly to the Colosseum is thin. Historians still argue whether most Christian deaths happened here, in the Circus Maximus, or in other smaller arenas. Yet by the Middle Ages, the Colosseum had already been crowned as the site of Christian sacrifice. Its very stones, people believed, were sanctified by suffering. Quirky tidbit: pilgrims carried away dust from the arena floor in little pouches, convinced it was holy soil infused with martyr blood. Some even mixed it into water, believing it offered protection or healing. Imagine travelers proudly showing friends a souvenir vial. Here's some sacred dirt. Careful, it's slightly used. You walk in your dream through the shadowed arches, imagining the stories whispered by monks. That Saint Ignatius of Antioch was thrown to lions here. That countless nameless faithful sang hymns as beasts tore them apart. The torches flicker, and you almost hear faint chanting rising from the sand. The myth gave the Colosseum a second life as a monument to endurance. Where once emperors flexed power, the church painted a canvas of faith triumphant over violence. Pilgrims gazed at broken walls not with sorrow but with awe, proof, they believed, that faith could outlast empire. Yet even as the myth grew, the truth stayed tangled. Historians still argue whether the Colosseum ever staged mass executions of Christians, or whether those tales were exaggerated centuries later to sanctify the ruin. But legends often matter more than facts. And so the Colosseum became not only Rome's arena of death, but also its shrine of courage. You pause in the arena floor in your imagination. The sand beneath your feet feels heavy, as though holding every story told about it. Was it truly soaked with the blood of martyrs? Or has time embroidered memory into myth? Either way, the effect is real. Pilgrims still kneel here, lighting candles, believing they touch the very ground where saints once stood. Quirky note: Renaissance painters often depicted Christians in the Colosseum, calmly awaiting lions while halos glowed above their heads. The image stuck so deeply that tourists today still ask guides, where exactly did the Christians die? And guides, smiling, point to the sand, knowing the truth is more complicated, but the story irresistible. The Colosseum became theater even in ruin, this time a theater of faith. You feel the paradox deep in your chest. Rome once built this place to celebrate dominance through violence. Centuries later, believers reimagined it as proof of victory through sacrifice. Both versions clash and overlap, leaving you to wander in a haze of memory, myth, and devotion. As you tilt your head to the broken rim glowing under moonlight, you realize the myth itself kept the Colosseum alive. If people hadn't believed in its sacredness, perhaps more stones would have been carted away, more arches collapsed into dust. Instead, pilgrims kept coming, whispering prayers into its cracks, convincing popes and priests that it was too holy to erase. You smile faintly. Maybe half the Colosseum disappeared into churches, palaces, and earthquakes, but the other half endures because of faith, legend, and storytelling, proof that myths can be as strong as mortar. You let the pilgrims' whispers fade and walk deeper into the ruin. Silence presses around you, but it isn't empty silence. It's filled with rustles, hoots, and bleats. The Colosseum, long abandoned as theater, church, or quarry, has found new tenants, nature itself. Imagine climbing through a broken arch in the 1600s and discovering a miniature wilderness sprouting inside. Weeds claw their way between marble cracks. Vines creep up the walls. and wildflowers bloom where senators once sat. By night, owls nest in shadowed niches, their eyes glowing as they swoop silently through moonlight. Goats graze among fallen stones, bleating as if they own the place. Quirky tidbit. Records describe shepherds actually keeping flocks in the Colosseum's hollow shell, turning the amphitheater into the strangest barnyard in Europe. Mainstream fact. By the 18th century, botanists cataloged more than 400 species of plants growing in the Colosseum, many of them rare, blown in from faraway lands on the fur of animals once dragged here for shows. The seeds took root in cracks, watered by centuries of rain. Historians still argue whether the microclimate of the ruin, cool shade, moist stone, trapped heat, created a unique ecosystem unlike anywhere else in Rome. You wander along, brushing your fingers across mossy stone, inhaling the earthy smell of damp leaves. The arena floor, once raked smooth with sand, is now soft with grass. Rabbits dart between shadows. At dusk, bats pour from the arches, streaking against the sky. You almost chuckle. The Colosseum, Rome's proudest monument of power, reduced to a petting zoo for goats and a hangout for owls. Quirky note. 19th century tourists often described the ruin as more garden than amphitheater. Some even came not to see gladiators' ghosts, but to picnic among wildflowers. Imagine spreading a blanket where lions once prowled and pulling out bread and cheese while swallows chirp overhead. As you climb higher in your dream, plants thicken. Ivy cascades over broken walls like green waterfalls. Roots worm into cracks, prying stones apart slowly but relentlessly. Nature is patient. It doesn't need earthquakes. One sprig at a time, it reclaims what empire once stole. You pause at the rim, looking down. Where once was blood and dust, now is meadow and songbird. You sense the irony. Rome built this place to dominate nature with spectacle, hauling lions from Africa and bears from the Alps. Now, centuries later, nature walks back in uninvited, free of cages, free of empire, reclaiming the ruins with quiet persistence. Historians still argue whether this wild growth preserved the Colosseum by cushioning its stones or hastened its decay by splitting its walls. Either way, the sight of daisies blooming where gladiators died turned ruin into poetry. The moonlight softens the scene. Crickets chirp. Somewhere a shepherd whistles, calling his flock through an arch that once thundered with 50,000 voices. The Colosseum has become a pasture, a garden, a forest in miniature. And you, sitting cross-legged in the grass, realize ruins never die. They just change caretakers. Half the Colosseum may have been hauled away, but the half that remains is alive with plants and creatures. It isn't empty stone. It's a living ruin, humming with the stubborn heartbeat of nature. You brush aside a vine curling over a broken arch and step into a vision of the Colosseum that belongs not to popes or peasants, not even to owls or goats, but to travelers. By the Renaissance, and especially the 18th century, the ruin drew artists, poets, and curious wanderers who came with sketchbooks, ink, and wide eyes. The Colosseum became a muse. Picture a young artist trudging up the Via Sacra, satchel of parchment slung over his shoulder, heart racing at the thought of finally seeing the world's grandest ruin. He arrives at dawn when mist drapes the arches and pulls out charcoal. Stroke by stroke, he traces the jagged rim of stone against the soft Roman sky. Later, back at his inn, he'll show fellow travelers the sketch, bragging like a tourist with a brand new selfie. Mainstream fact. Countless sketches, etchings, and paintings of the Colosseum filled European portfolios from the Renaissance through the Grand Tour era. Artists like Piranesi turned it into an icon of picturesque ruin, its arches exaggerated into sublime shapes meant to stir awe. Quirky tidbit. Some travelers sketched so obsessively they even drew the goats grazing inside, immortalizing animals who probably cared more about grass than glory. You wander through this dream and hear the scratch of quills, the mutter of poets scribbling verses. One sighs that the Colosseum is a crown of broken teeth. Another gushes that it is Rome's heartbeat made stone. Tourists climb onto crumbling steps for better views, balancing sketch pads precariously, while locals roll their eyes at yet another foreigner blocking the stairway. Historians still argue whether these sketches preserved the Colosseum's true state or romanticized it into something grander. After all, ruins always look more poetic in ink than in real life. But the drawings spread across Europe, printed in books, displayed in salons, inspiring dreamers who had never set foot in Italy. Quirky note: 18th century guidebooks often instructed travelers on the best hours to sketch the Colosseum. Morning light for drama, evening light for melancholy. Imagine the scene at sunset, artists lined up with easels like paparazzi, chasing the perfect shadow across stone. If Instagram had existed, the Colosseum would have been the most over-filtered ruin of its day. As you stroll along the inner corridor in your mind, you hear snatches of languages: English, French, German, all chattering with excitement. Wealthy youths on their grand tour, finally touching the past they'd only read about in books. Some complain about the smell of goats, others swoon at the romance of moonlit ruins. Either way, they leave with sketchbooks filled, stories polished, and reputations burnished back home. The Colosseum becomes less a ruin and more a symbol of culture. To sketch it was to prove you were educated, sensitive, refined. And to walk its arches was to feel both small and eternal at the same time. You sit cross-legged on a cracked step in your imagination, watching the artist's work. The air smells of ink and damp stone. A poet nearby whispers lines into the dusk, while another grumbles that his drawing looks more like a squashed beehive than a majestic ruin. You chuckle softly. Turns out even the great Colosseum couldn't save everyone from bad perspective. The sun dips, lanterns flicker, and shadows stretch like ink across the floor. The travelers pack up, satisfied with their work, carrying pieces of the Colosseum back to their homelands in paper and verse. And you, still sitting there, realize the ruin has taken on yet another role. Not arena, not fortress, not quarry, but canvas. Half of it may be gone in stone. But in sketchbooks and poems, it grows larger than ever, spread across Europe, multiplied in imagination, eternal in art. You sit quietly on a cracked step, letting the echo of scratching quills and sighing poets dissolve into something softer. The Colosseum is no longer only drawn, it is dreamed. By the 18th and 19th centuries, Romantic travelers saw this ruin not as rubble but as poetry carved in stone. They didn't come for history lessons. They came to feel small, to taste melancholy, to sigh dramatically under the moon. Mainstream fact: poets like Byron, Shelley, and later Henry James wrote rhapsodically about the Colosseum. They described moonlight pouring through broken arches, vines curling like sorrowful fingers, and silence heavy enough to make you believe ghosts still walk the sand. Their words painted the ruin as a symbol of mortality and beauty, a reminder that even empires crumble into something strangely tender. You imagine strolling alongside them in your dream. The moon hangs silver, casting shadows across jagged walls. A poet lifts his chin, cloak billowing, and whispers, "This ruin is eternity weeping." You smirk because, honestly, he might just be fishing for applause, or maybe trying to impress the woman standing beside him. Quirky tidbit: Romantic travelers often treated the Colosseum as the ultimate backdrop for declarations of love, sketching not just ruins, but initials entwined inside hearts carved onto ancient stone. History and heartbreak side by side. You tilt your head and notice how the ruin seems designed for drama. Torches flicker through arches, vines sway in the night breeze, owls hoot mournfully overhead. You feel the hush of thousands of years pressing down, a lullaby of decay. The poets weren't exaggerating. The Colosseum really does look like it was built to break your heart beautifully. Historians still argue whether Romantic writers distorted the Colosseum's image by turning it into a symbol of ruin rather than a living building. But distortion or not, the vision stuck. Suddenly, the Colosseum wasn't just Rome's amphitheater. It was a shrine to loss, longing, and grandeur. Quirky note: some travelers timed their visits to coincide with moonrise, convinced that only in silver light could the ruin reveal its true self. One diary even gushes about the noble arches kissed by the moon's melancholy lips. You roll your eyes gently, but admit, the moon does make the Colosseum look like something out of a dream. You lean back against the cold stone, closing your eyes as a breeze brushes your cheek. The silence is thick, yet you feel it vibrating with centuries of sighs. Couples stroll hand in hand, whispering promises under arches. Artists sketch silhouettes bathed in moonlight. Pilgrims kneel still, clutching rosaries. The ruin doesn't belong to emperors anymore. It belongs to feelings. You laugh softly to yourself. Once the Colosseum made crowds roar with bloodlust. Now it makes travelers swoon with sentiment. The theater hasn't stopped, it's just changed genres, from action epic to romantic drama. As the moon climbs higher, the ruin glows like a crown of broken silver. You watch shadows dance across arches, vines shimmer like threads, and the floor soften into dreamscape. The Colosseum, half standing, half lost, becomes not tragedy, but beauty. And you, wrapped in the hush of night, realize this ruin has outlasted empire because it learned how to be more than stone. Half its body may be gone, but in poetry, in size, in moonlight, it is whole again, an eternal stage for love, sorrow, and wonder. You brush the last echoes of French bugles from your ears and step into a quieter century. The 1800s unfold, and the Colosseum is no longer just backdrop for poets or a prize for conquerors. Now, men in dusty coats and wide-brimmed hats crawl through its bowels with brushes, notebooks, and an almost childlike curiosity. Archaeologists have arrived. Mainstream fact: serious excavations of the Colosseum began in the 19th century, with Pope Pius VII ordering digs into the hypogeum, the underground chambers hidden for centuries. Workers shoveled away centuries of soil, revealing tunnels, cages, and mechanisms that once powered the grand spectacles. Quirky tidbit. One archaeologist in 1850 described finding the bones of exotic animals, lions, bears, even ostriches, buried in the dirt. Imagine dusting off a femur only to realize it belonged to a creature dragged here from halfway across the world. You wander in your dream, torch in hand, down into the hypogeum. The air is damp, heavy with the smell of earth and moss. Your footsteps splash in shallow puddles where water still seeps through cracks. Wooden beams creak under the strain of excavation. Men bend low, muttering in Italian and Latin, their candlelight dancing across the walls. Suddenly, the underground labyrinth is no longer rumor. It breathes again. Historians still argue how much of the hypogeum was intact before these digs, and how much was reconstructed later. Some chambers may have collapsed entirely, while others remained surprisingly whole, sealed off like forgotten tombs. Either way, archaeologists in the 19th century transformed the Colosseum from romantic ruin into a scientific puzzle. Above ground, surveyors carefully measured every arch, every crack, sketching diagrams to preserve what centuries had left. You imagine a scholar squinting at his parchment, tongue poking out in concentration, while goats bleated nearby as if mocking his seriousness. Quirky note: some Victorian tourists who visited during the excavations wrote home describing the Colosseum as half construction site, half archaeological Disneyland. One complained the dust ruined her parasol. Another bragged about bribing a guard to pocket a shard of pottery. Even science couldn't strip away the ruin's role as tourist magnet. As you stroll through the half-cleared tunnels, you hear whispers of history rising, creaking pulleys, roars of beasts, cries of gladiators. The archaeologists themselves admitted the place felt haunted. Every shovel strike seemed to wake echoes from the past. Some even refused to work at night, afraid the ghosts of martyrs or gladiators would protest. But the work continued. Slowly, maps of the hypogeum were drawn, showing how elevators once lifted cages, how trapdoors opened to release beasts, how entire stage sets could vanish underground. The Colosseum wasn't just a ruin anymore. It was reimagined as the greatest machine of antiquity. Its secrets laid bare stone by stone. Above, scaffolding clung to the outer walls as restorers braced leaning arches. Tourists watched men hammer in supports, marveling at how the ruin itself seemed to live between decay and repair. Some parts were patched, others left wild. The Colosseum stood caught between memory and reconstruction, its story half rediscovered, half invented anew. You pause in the torchlight, running your hand along damp walls where moss glistens. Imagine standing where an elephant once waited in a cage, trunk brushing iron bars, before being lifted into roaring sunlight. The archaeologists weren't just uncovering stone, they were unearthing theater. The night above deepens, but down here, the ruin feels timeless. Archaeologists wipe sweat from their brows, candles sputter, notebooks fill with sketches. And you, crouched among them, realized that half the Colosseum's story had been buried, waiting patiently for curious hands. The amphitheater wasn't just half gone, it was half hidden. And now, shovel by shovel, torch by torch, it whispered its secrets back into the world. You climb back out of the damp hypogeum in your dream, shaking dust from your hands, and wander around the jagged rim of the outer wall. The archaeologists have shown you what still lies beneath, but now your eyes drift outward to what's missing. So much of the Colosseum isn't gone to time alone. It was stolen, carried away stone by stone, until the amphitheater looked more like a plundered carcass than a ruin. Mainstream fact. Enormous chunks of Colosseum stone were reused in Rome for centuries. Palaces like Palazzo Venezia, fountains like the Fontana di Trevi, and even St. Peter's Basilica contain pieces of the arena. If you stare at half of Rome's Renaissance architecture, you're staring at the Colosseum in disguise. Quirky tidbit. Some sources say even nails and clamps were scavenged, melted down for other projects. That explains the strange pockmarks dotting the walls today, like acne scars left after a long fever. You wander in your imagination past a Renaissance worksite. Oxen strain at wagons loaded with travertine blocks pried loose from the amphitheater's ribs. Masons shout, chisels clink, and dust clouds rise as the Colosseum shrinks, one block at a time. To them it isn't history, it's free construction material lying around. You sigh softly. Rome loved grandeur, but wasn't sentimental about recycling. Historians still argue how much of the missing Colosseum went to official papal projects versus sneaky nighttime theft by locals. Was it systematic quarrying or just opportunistic stone snatching? Either way, the result is plain. You're standing before a half-empty skeleton. Quirky note. Travelers of the 1500s often described the Colosseum as a stone mine. Some even noted locals joked about it being Rome's most convenient quarry, saving people from trekking to Tivoli. Imagine standing proudly in your new Renaissance home and bragging, yes, these steps, authentic Colosseum, delivered straight to my door. You run your hand along the jagged break where the southern wall used to curve. You picture ropes straining, cranes creaking, blocks lowered carefully onto carts. Each stone that left weakened the giant further, until its symmetry broke forever. What remains is a half-circle of endurance, the other half scattered like a puzzle whose pieces were stolen. The irony, of course, is that the Colosseum didn't vanish. It just disguised itself across Rome. Every fountain you admire, every palace wall you touch, may carry whispers of gladiators' roars. The Colosseum isn't dead, it's everywhere. You walk past a church altar and swear the marble grain looks familiar. Somewhere in its veins might be a shard of stone that once framed the emperor's box. You chuckle softly at the thought. Pilgrims prayed at marble stolen from the arena where martyrs may have died. Children splashed in fountains built from blocks that once echoed with lions' roars. Tourists marveled at basilicas decorated with fragments of Death Theater. The Colosseum became both invisible and immortal, hidden in plain sight. As you lean against a wall in your dream, the pockmarks stare back at you like old wounds. The building isn't just half collapsed by nature, it's half skeletonized by people. And maybe that's the strangest part of the story. Earthquakes cracked it, but humans hollowed it. Piece by piece, cart by cart, Rome dismantled its own monument and spread it through the city like seeds scattered in the wind. The night breeze brushes your cheek, carrying the faint scent of damp stone and roses from a nearby garden. You glance around and whisper, half the Colosseum is gone, yes, but only if you don't know where to look. Because in truth, it never left Rome at all. You stroll through the city in your dream now, leaving the jagged arches behind for a moment. Rome stretches around you, a patchwork of palaces, basilicas, and fountains, each glittering with marble. And as you look closer, you realize you're still inside the Colosseum, only in pieces. Its body has been scattered like relics, tucked into the very bones of the city. Mainstream fact, large chunks of Colosseum stone ended up in Roman churches. San Pietro in Vincoli, San Giovanni in Laterano, and even St. Peter's Basilica all contain marble and travertine pilfered from the amphitheater. Quirky tidbit, some chapels still display inscriptions on their columns that clearly came from pagan monuments, a sort of historical recycling where Christ's altar sits literally on Rome's blood-soaked stage. You step into one of these churches in your dream. Candles flicker against smooth marble pillars. Parishioners kneel in prayer, unaware, or maybe deeply aware, that the stone beneath their knees once echoed with lions' roars. You run your hand along a column, tracing faint marks that might have framed an archway of the arena centuries before. The Colosseum didn't just vanish, it was baptized, reborn as church architecture. Historians still argue whether the church preserved the Colosseum by sanctifying its ruins, or doomed it further by mining it for holy projects. Either way, the amphitheater became the city's most generous donor, giving its bones to keep faith alive. Quirky note, A few Renaissance preachers even boasted that the Colosseum had been redeemed because its stones now upheld altars. One sermon claimed, "The blood of gladiators now supports the blood of Christ." That's poetic, if a bit unsettling. You can almost picture gladiators groaning at being turned into church furniture. As you wander farther, you see fountains splashing with lion-faced spouts carved from Colosseum marble. Steps leading into piazzas glisten with travertine slabs that once bore senators' sandals. A noblewoman descends them in your imagination, silk rustling, unaware she's walking on recycled history. You pause in front of a Renaissance palace. Its facade gleams in the evening light, smooth and stately. But your eyes know better. Those blocks were once curved, fitted into the Colosseum's perfect ellipse. Now they stand in straight lines, obedient to a new master. The Colosseum, like a ghost, has disguised itself in palaces of power. The irony makes you chuckle softly. For centuries, pilgrims came to the arena to venerate martyrs. Meanwhile, nobles hauled away its bones to flaunt wealth. Faith and pride, both built on the same skeleton. Rome didn't just lose half a Colosseum. It absorbed it, like a city cannibalizing itself to stay alive. You tilt your head back toward the night sky. The half-circle of ruin you left behind glows under the moon, jagged and proud. But now you see its spirit everywhere, in church walls, palace columns, fountains spray. The Colosseum hasn't disappeared. It has multiplied. And as you exhale, you realize something soothing. Those stones were stolen, the amphitheater's essence survived by being shared. Half the Colosseum isn't lost. It simply learned how to live many lives. You wander farther through your dream of Rome, following the sound of splashing water. The city at night glimmers with fountains, their basins shimmering under torchlight and moonlight. And suddenly it hits you. Even here, in the laughter of water, you're standing inside the Colosseum's ghost. Mainstream fact. Huge portions of the Colosseum's stone were recycled into fountains across Rome. The Fontana di Trevi, for instance, incorporates travertine blocks quarried from the amphitheater. Quirky tidbit. Some lion-headed spouts gushing water in smaller piazzas were carved from arena marble, meaning thirsty Romans once drank from the same stone that soaked gladiators' blood. Talk about mixed uses. You crouch in your dream beside one such fountain. Children splash their hands, giggling, while an old man fills a jug. The marble lip of the basin feels smooth under your palm, but faint chisel marks whisper of another life, once part of a step in the Colosseum, maybe even part of a wall against which a gladiator leaned before a fight. You close your eyes, and water sounds almost like a crowd roaring. Historians still argue whether Romans reused the Colosseum's stone out of practicality or out of some subconscious reverence, giving new life to a place too iconic to waste. Either way, the amphitheater dissolved into the veins of the city, bubbling up in every splash. Quirky note, there are accounts of tourists in the 1700s joking that by tossing a coin into a Roman fountain, you were technically throwing money back to the Colosseum. It had given its bones to the city, and now the city demanded tribute in return. As you wander in your dream, fountains line piazzas like scattered jewels, all carrying echoes of the amphitheater. Some gush with dramatic sculptures, gods reclining on seashells. Others are humble lion mouths trickling into stone troughs. In each, the Colosseum flows, not as blood now, but as water, a softer reminder of eternity. The irony makes you smile faintly. The amphitheater once paraded Rome's power with roars and screams. Now its stones hum with gentler sounds, splashes, laughter, whispered wishes cast into the water. The violence has been rinsed away, recycled into refreshment. You lean down, cupping your hands to drink. The water is cold, clear, running over marble that once bore the heat of midday games. It tastes faintly of minerals, but also of continuity, proof that nothing in Rome ever truly disappears. As you straighten up, drops falling from your chin, you look around the piazza. Couples laugh under lanterns, children dart between shadows, vendors sell roasted chestnuts by the glow of coals. And you realize the Colosseum didn't die when half its walls fell. It trickled outward into churches and fountains, palaces and piazzas, feeding the city like veins feeding a body. You turn your gaze back toward the jagged silhouette in the distance. Half of it stands proud against the night. The other half lives scattered in stone and water. And you whisper to yourself, the Colosseum's roar has softened, but it still speaks. in the splash of every Roman fountain. You wander back toward the amphitheater itself, your ears still filled with the splash of fountains. The Colosseum looms in the distance, a half-circle of shadow and moonlight, but something feels different. You notice new barriers, iron railings, and scaffolds creeping up its sides. The modern world has arrived, and with it, an urge to fence off the past. Mainstream fact. By the 18th and 19th centuries, as tourism grew and Rome reinvented itself, authorities began installing railings and supports to stop further plundering. The Colosseum was no longer a free-for-all quarry. It became a monument to be guarded, stabilized, and displayed. Quirky tidbit. Early visitors often complained that fences spoiled their sketches, scribbling notes about ugly iron bars interrupting noble arches. Apparently, even centuries ago, people hated construction scaffolding ruining their view. You imagine wandering through the ruin in this era. Guards lean lazily on spears at the entrances, keeping an eye out for stone thieves. Wooden railings line staircases where once senators strolled. Ropes block off crumbling sections, warning tourists not to wander too far. And yet, behind the ropes, goats still graze, indifferent to the new rules. Historians still argue whether these early preservation efforts saved the Colosseum or merely slowed its decay. Some say the fences kept out scavengers. Others claim people simply stole smaller chunks instead of whole blocks. Either way, the image shifts. The Colosseum isn't just a ruin now, it's a ruin under management. Quirky note. Victorian travelers wrote of bribing guards to sneak past the barriers at night, wandering the ruin by moonlight despite the rules. One even bragged that he liberated a small piece of stone as a keepsake, calling it a more honest souvenir than buying trinkets from street vendors. Some habits, it seems, never change. As you move deeper in your imagination, you hear the clang of hammers as workers shore up leaning arches with brick supports. Scaffolding clings to the outer wall, crews shouting instructions. The ruin groans under their efforts, but it stands a little taller, a little steadier. You sense a shift. Rome no longer treats the Colosseum as raw material. It treats it as heritage. The atmosphere feels different too. Tourists gather at designated spots, guides waving their arms, explaining history in sing-song voices. Souvenir sellers hawk sketches, trinkets, even bits of ancient stone, probably chipped off from some other unlucky wall. The Colosseum, fenced and guarded, becomes not only a monument, but a marketplace. You lean on one of the railings, running your hand along the cold iron. The view of arches framed by bars makes you sigh. Protection always costs a little freedom, but then you notice something calming. The ruin is quieter now, safer, less harassed. It may no longer belong to scavengers, but it belongs to memory, and to everyone who stops to gaze. As the night deepens, the torches flicker against the new fences. You hear the faint scrape of a guard's boot, the clink of coins exchanged for entry, the murmur of tourists debating whether the ruin is worth the price. And you realize the Colosseum has shifted again. Once theater, then quarry, then fortress, now museum. Half its body may be gone, but the half that remains is being guarded, not dismantled. And as you exhale, you whisper, perhaps fences, ugly though they seem, are the only reason you can still wander here tonight. You lean against one of those iron railings, the chill biting your palms, and look out across the arena. It isn't silent anymore. The modern age has awakened the Colosseum, not with lions or gladiators, but with footsteps. Tourists flood in, a different kind of crowd, carrying guidebooks and cameras instead of bread and wagers. The roar has become chatter in a dozen languages, mainstream fact. By the late 19th and especially the 20th century, the Colosseum became one of the most visited landmarks in Europe. Millions of travelers filed through its arches each year, eager to stand inside history. Quirky tidbit. Victorian tourists sometimes chipped off bits of marble as keepsakes, tucking them into pockets the way you might pocket a seashell. Some even carved their names into the walls, like ancient graffiti's clumsy cousins. You wander in your dream through the crowd. A guide waves a little flag, his voice bouncing off stone. On your left, the Emperor's box. On your right, the hypogum. Tourists snap photos, squinting at the bright sun, then duck into shadows to fan themselves. Vendors outside hawk postcards, cheap marble busts, and gelato so sweet it makes your teeth ache. The Colosseum is no longer Rome's bread and circuses. It's Rome's bread and souvenirs. Historians still argue how much tourism has saved or strained the monument. Some say ticket sales funded preservation, while others point out that millions of trampling feet wear down stone as surely as centuries of goats. Either way, the Colosseum has shifted from a ruin to a stage once more. This time, the audience performs by documenting itself. Quirky note: some mid-20th century tourists posed for photos pretending to fight like gladiators, swinging umbrellas as swords. Families back home flipped through albums and laughed. "Look, Uncle George is a gladiator." The amphitheater had become not just a monument but a prop for vacation comedy. You pause and listen. The chatter is a softer echo of the ancient roar. Children laugh. Couples argue over which arch has the best light. Guides recite dates like incantations. And through it all, the Colosseum endures, half ruin, half museum, fully spectacle. The modern world adds new layers. Floodlights wash the arches at night, turning them gold against the sky. Restoration crews hammer in supports while tourists sip espresso nearby. The ruin has become part of a living city again, stitched into its economy as firmly as it once was into its empire. You sit on a stone bench, watching a group of travelers lean close to touch the walls. Their hands brush pockmarked surfaces, their eyes wide, their voices hushed. Some smile, some frown, some grow silent. The Colosseum doesn't roar anymore, but it still commands awe. Half of it is missing, yet somehow that absence makes the presence stronger. As the sun sets, the chatter dies down. Tourists shuffle out through gates, their sandals and sneakers echoing the same rhythm of feet that filled this place 2 millennia ago. The arena empties, the air cools, and for a brief moment, silence returns. You realize the Colosseum hasn't lost its audience. It's simply changed shows. Half gone, half standing, it remains a theater. And you among the tourists whisper, history never disappears. It just sells tickets at the door. You linger in the emptying corridors of your dream, the day's chatter fading into a hush. The tourists have gone, the guards lock the gates, and moonlight returns to the arches. And now, in the silence, you sense the quieter arguments that swirl around this ruin, not shouted by emperors or vendors, but debated by scholars. Mainstream fact, historians, architects, and archaeologists have long debated whether the Colosseum should ever be restored to something like its original form. Some propose partial reconstructions of the missing southern wall or the arena floor. Others insist it must remain as ruin, its brokenness part of its story. Quirky tidbit: in the 19th century, one architect seriously suggested rebuilding the Colosseum into a modern amphitheater for concerts, complete with gas lamps and velvet seats. Imagine buying a ticket to a symphony in a Colosseum rebuilt like a Victorian opera house. You stroll in your dream beneath the jagged rim thinking about these arguments. Some scholars argue that half of the Colosseum's absence makes it powerful, that seeing the ruin fragmented reminds you of time's weight. Others counter that rebuilding would let visitors finally see what Rome truly looked like in its glory. Historians still argue, should the Colosseum be a museum of loss or a stage for revival? Quirky note: in the early 2000s, Italian officials debated reconstructing part of the arena floor so modern events could be staged. Opera, theater, maybe even sports. Some celebrated the idea, others condemned it as tacky. Imagine Beyoncé belting under the arches while archaeologists groan into their wine. As you walk along the curve, you notice scaffolding again, this time not to dismantle but to preserve. Crews chip away plants, patch cracks, reinforce leaning walls. The Colosseum has become a patient in permanent surgery. Every decade, new plans emerge. Rebuild more, rebuild less, freeze it as it is. The ruin never stops being debated, and you, pacing slowly through the moonlit arena, feel the weight of those questions. What does it mean to save a ruin? To leave it alone knowing it may crumble? To patch it endlessly, turning it into a Frankenstein of old and new? Or to boldly rebuild, risking kitsch for the sake of vision? There is no simple answer. The irony hits you. The Colosseum has been repurposed so many times. Church, fortress, quarry, tourist magnet, that even its future identity can't be fixed. It is always in flux, always half something, never whole. Maybe that's the secret to its survival. You run your fingers along the stone, feeling pits and cracks, patched spots and raw edges. Half is ruin, half is repair. You realize that's what the Colosseum is now, a debate you can walk through, a question in the shape of stone. As the night deepens, you hear an owl hoot overhead, wings brushing past the arches. The air grows cooler, the ruin quieter, but the debates still hum in the background, unresolved. And maybe that's the point. The Colosseum, like Rome itself, thrives in argument. Half gone, half preserved, it remains not an answer but a conversation. And you whisper into the silence. Some ruins endure not because they are complete, but because they refuse to ever be finished.
You slip away from the echo of debates and descend again into the belly of the Colosseum. The moonlight fades as you step down rough stairs, your hand brushing damp stone. The air cools, heavy with the scent of earth and mildew. This is the underworld of the amphitheater, the Hypogeum, a labyrinth where the real theater began. Mainstream fact: the Hypogeum was a 2-level network of tunnels and cages, added under Emperor Domitian, where animals and gladiators waited in darkness before being hoisted into the arena. Quirky tidbit: some of the elevators here could lift a 600-pound lion straight to the sand with a system of pulleys, counterweights, and men running inside giant hamster wheel-like mechanisms. Imagine being the guy whose shift was lion elevator operator. Talk about a stressful job. You wander in your dream with a torch, its light flickering over niches where cages once stood. You picture a bear pacing restlessly, claws scraping wood, eyes flashing in the dark. Beside it, a gladiator waits, gripping his sword hilt, listening to the muffled roar of the crowd above. The atmosphere must have been thick with fear, sweat, and the musk of animals. Historians still argue how elaborate the underground machinery really was. Some claim the Hypogeum had as many as 36 elevators, each capable of springing beasts into the arena. Others think many of the trapdoors were simpler, just sliding hatches. Either way, the effect above ground was magical. The floor erupted with sudden appearances. Forests sprung from nowhere. Monsters seemed to materialize from the earth itself. Quirky note: archaeologists found grooves in the stone floors of these tunnels, probably worn by endless dragging of cages and props. You imagine the squeal of wooden wheels, the grunt of slaves pulling ropes, and the creak of winches echoing in the gloom. If you squint, you can almost see sparks of oil lamps glimmering against damp walls. You crouch low, pressing your palm against cool travertine. The walls feel alive, humming with centuries of sound. Chains rattling, animals growling, men whispering prayers. Above, the arena sand muffled everything, so the crowd never knew the chaos happening right below their feet. You chuckle softly. Rome basically invented backstage drama. As you walk farther, you find a narrow staircase twisting upward. In your mind's eye, a trapdoor above suddenly bangs open. Sunlight floods in and a cage rises. The roar of the crowd explodes, and the gladiator inside stumbles into blinding light. For the spectators, it was spectacle. For him, it was the end of hope or the start of glory. You pause in the torchlight, breathing slow. The Hypogeum feels like a second Colosseum, hidden, forgotten, but essential. Without it, the magic above would have been impossible. Half the Colosseum story lives down here in shadows, carved into damp tunnels and rusted iron. As you climb back toward the surface, torch guttering, you feel the strange duality. Above, glory and cheers. Below, sweat and fear. The Colosseum wasn't just built of stone. It was built of contrast, light and dark, spectacle and suffering, surface and secret. And as you emerge into moonlight again, the arches towering above, you whisper. Half the Colosseum still stands, half has vanished, but the other half has always been hidden beneath your feet. You brush dust from your hands as you climb back into the open air. The moon hangs high above the broken rim, and suddenly you hear another kind of hum. Not gladiators or emperors this time, but the steady buzz of commerce. The Colosseum has always been theater, but in modern centuries it also became an economy, feeding 1,000 small livelihoods around its arches. Mainstream fact: by the late 19th and 20th centuries, the Colosseum wasn't just a monument. It was a magnet for vendors, tour guides, pickpockets, and entrepreneurs of every sort. The site became as much a marketplace as a memory. Quirky tidbit: some of the earliest official guides were actually clever locals who memorized a few historical dates, dressed in ragged cloaks to look dramatic, and charged tourists for stories that were half true and half imagination. You wander in your dream along the outer ring and hear the din merchants spread cloths on the cobblestones, selling coins from Caesar's time, freshly minted in someone's backyard. Kids run up to tourists, offering postcards with crooked photos. Pickpockets brush past distracted travelers, their eyes sharp as hawks. Rome may have fallen once, but capitalism is eternal. Historians still argue whether tourism saves or spoils monuments like this. Does a constant flow of money keep the Colosseum standing, or does a constant flow of feet grind it into dust? The debate hums as loudly as the vendors calling out prices. Quirky note. By the mid-20th century, locals began dressing as gladiators outside the Colosseum, offering tourist photos for a few coins. Some took their roles seriously, flexing swords and muscles. Others smoked cigarettes in between posing, half bored but still charging full price. The effect was unintentionally hilarious. Gladiators with sunglasses, leaning against mopeds. You circle the ruin, weaving through the imaginary crowd. A gelato seller jingles coins in his apron, scooping pistachio for sweaty visitors. A guide waves his umbrella like a banner, shouting facts over the din of traffic. A thief slips away into the alleys, pockets full. The Colosseum is no longer Rome's center of empire, but it is still a center of hustle. Inside, the hum continues. Loudspeakers announce visiting hours. Tour groups shuffle, snapping selfies. Vendors hawk bottled water at outrageous prices. Authentic Roman water, they claim, though you saw them refill at the fountain outside. You chuckle softly. Even scams are part of the economy here. And yet, you feel a strange continuity. 2,000 years ago, vendors sold bread, olives, and wine in these same arches. Gamblers traded coins on gladiatorial outcomes. Thieves worked the crowds. The names have changed, souvenirs instead of figs, selfies instead of wagers. But the energy is the same. The Colosseum has always been a marketplace wrapped in spectacle. As you stand in the moonlight, you realize this too is survival. Half the Colosseum may be gone, but the half that stands keeps Rome fed. Not with games, but with tickets, tours, and gelato cones. Every postcard sold. Every guide hired. Every scam pulled is another way the ruin continues to generate life. You lean on the railing, listening to coins clink, voices murmur, shutters snap. The roar of lions is long gone, but the hum of commerce fills the same space. And you whisper with a smile, the Colosseum never stopped being an economy. It just changed its currency. You step away from the vendors in your dream, gelato still cold on your tongue, and glance back at the half circle of jagged arches. The Colosseum glows under spotlights now, golden against the Roman night. It has survived emperors, earthquakes, looters, and goats. But it has also survived by becoming something else entirely, a stage for stories. Mainstream fact. The Colosseum has appeared in countless works of art, novels, and more recently, films. From Byron's poetry to Hollywood epics like Gladiator, the ruin is less a building and more a symbol, cast again and again as backdrop for drama. Quirky tidbit. In the 19th century, travelers were sometimes charged extra to climb the upper tiers for the best view, and local storytellers exaggerated tales of Christian martyrs to entertain foreign listeners. In a way, the Colosseum became its own franchise long before cinema. You wanted the arena floor, hearing faint echoes of a film crew clattering across the sand. A director waves his arms. More dust, more blood. Make it real. Extras in plastic armor stumble through rehearsed battles, their fake swords clanging. The ruin watches silently, amused. 2,000 years ago, gladiators fought to survive. Now actors pretend to fight, so audiences can munch popcorn. You smirk. Same spectacle, safer insurance policies. Historians still argue whether movies like Gladiator distort the past or bring it to life. Did thumbs really decide life and death? Did emperors truly stage naval battles here? The film blurred fact and fiction, but also reignited fascination. Millions who never set foot in Rome suddenly dreamed of this arena, their imaginations filling the missing stones. Quirky note. Modern productions have staged operas and concerts in the Colosseum itself. Singers belted arias where lions once roared. Violins soared where crowds once screamed. Some called it beautiful. Others muttered that the acoustics were terrible. Still, for one night, the ruin became theater again, not of death, but of art. You climb the steps in your imagination, settling into a high seat. Below, the stage glows, actors strut, lights flare. For a moment, it feels almost as if the Colosseum has been restored to purpose. The show is different, but the energy is the same. An audience gathered, eyes fixed, hearts beating in rhythm. The Colosseum has always been more than stone. It is a canvas. Emperors painted with blood, popes with incense, poets with sighs, filmmakers with celluloid. Each age tells its own story here, and the ruin, obliging, plays every role. You lean back, gazing at the broken rim silhouetted against the stars. Half of it may be gone, but in films, books, sketches, and operas, it is whole again, larger than life. The Colosseum doesn't just exist in Rome. It lives in every story told about it. As the night grows deeper, you whisper. Maybe that's the secret of endurance. A building of stone may crumble, but a building of stories never truly falls. You linger in your dream among the quiet arches, the echoes of movies fading. The Colosseum stands before you like a half-giant, its northern side still proud, its southern flank broken, ribs of stone exposed. You tilt your head and realize the strangest truth of all. What makes this ruin so powerful isn't what remains, but what is missing. Mainstream fact. The Colosseum originally rose nearly 50 meters high, its full oval unbroken, its facade a gleaming ring of arches. Today, barely half of that outer wall survives. Earthquakes, scavengers, and centuries of neglect carved it down to its skeleton. Quirky tidbit. The missing southern wall collapsed largely in the 1349 earthquake, and its stones were carted off almost instantly to build palaces. In other words, part of the Colosseum fell in a night, and the rest walked away in carts by morning. You walk around its curve, your footsteps echoing against intact arches, then fading into open space where the wall is gone. One side towers, orderly and proud. The other looks raw, jagged, exposed, as if time itself had taken a bite. And strangely, it's this imbalance that grips you. A perfect Colosseum would feel imposing. A half Colosseum feels human. Historians still argue whether the ruin's brokenness should be mourned or celebrated. Some wish it could be rebuilt to symmetry. Others insist the gaps make it meaningful. You pause and think. If it were whole, would it still feel eternal? Or would it just feel like a very old stadium? Quirky note. In the 18th century, some artists deliberately sketched the Colosseum from its broken side, exaggerating the jagged silhouette to heighten the drama. Tourists complained that the good half looked too clean. What they really wanted was picturesque decay. Even ruins, it seems, have a better angle. You stand in the gap, moonlight pouring through. The missing wall frames the stars like a window. A breeze brushes your face, carrying the faint scent of damp stone and night jasmine. You imagine the voices of emperors, gladiators, monks, goats, tourists, all rushing out through that empty space. The Colosseum doesn't just endure in what stands. It breathes through what is gone. And you realize something profound. Half of it was meant to disappear. Not by design, of course, but by destiny. The ruin teaches that survival isn't about being whole. It's about being enough. Half a Colosseum is still more powerful than almost anything built after it. You trace the rough edges of broken stone, fingers brushing history's wounds. You whisper softly, perfection crumbles, imperfection lasts. The Colosseum, half standing, half vanished, is no less eternal. In fact, it is eternal because of that very incompleteness. You sit on a ledge of broken stone, the jagged edge sharp under your palm, and listen. The city around the Colosseum hums with cars, mopeds, and laughter drifting from trattorias. Yet here inside, another kind of noise lingers. Not the roar of lions or the cheers of senators. Something quieter, softer, almost sacred. The ruin has become not just a monument, but a place of memory and mourning. Mainstream fact. Every Good Friday since the 18th century, popes have led the Via Crucis, the Stations of Cross, through the Colosseum. Pilgrims gather by torchlight, retracing the passion of Christ across arches once stained with gladiator blood. Quirky tidbit. Pope John Paul II in the 1980s made the ritual globally visible, with television cameras broadcasting the glowing procession circling through the ruin. Millions saw the Colosseum transformed into a living church. You wander in your dream among flickering torches. Pilgrims shuffle quietly, candles in hand, their flames trembling in the breeze. Latin hymns rise, echoing through arches cracked by time. The sand underfoot glows orange in firelight, and the ruin feels alive again, but not with violence. With prayer. Historians still argue whether the Colosseum ever truly held mass martyrdoms of Christians, but the symbolism has overpowered the uncertainty. For believers, it is a shrine to courage and faith. For others, it is simply a place where humanity's cruelty is remembered and repurposed into hope. Either way, the Colosseum has become more than stone. It has become conscience. Quirky note. In the late 20th century, lights on the Colosseum were deliberately switched from white to gold whenever a death sentence was commuted somewhere in the world. Imagine the ruin glowing against the night sky, silently proclaiming mercy. A 2,000-year-old amphitheater turned into a billboard for compassion. You stand in the center of the arena floor, torches circling around you. The crowd is silent now, heads bowed. The arches tower like cathedral walls, broken but solemn, and the stars shine down to the missing roof. You breathe deeply, feeling both the weight of history and the strange piece of ritual. The Colosseum no longer belongs to emperors or nobles, but to memory itself. It holds grief and reverence in equal measure. You realize this ruin has become a vessel, not of games, not propaganda, but of meaning layered century upon century. As the torches dim, you step back into the shadows and whisper. Half the Colosseum is gone, but the half that stands holds all the weight of both spectacle and sanctity. It remembers everything, and asks you to remember, too. You linger in the hush after the torches fade, but the dream shifts again, carrying you into the shadow of the 20th century. The Colosseum has seen emperors and pilgrims, artists and looters. Now it must stand through wars, dictatorships, and bombs. Its arches, already fractured, become backdrops for a darker theater. Mainstream fact. During World War II, the Colosseum stood within a city bracing for air raids. Though it wasn't directly destroyed, bombs shook Rome, and people feared the ancient ruin might finally crumble. Later, under Mussolini's fascist regime, the Colosseum was lit and staged as a rallying symbol of Roman might, paraded as proof of Italy's destined greatness. Quirky tidbit. Mussolini once arranged for a motorcycle race to loop around the Colosseum, turning the ancient ruin into a racetrack for propaganda stunts. Imagine gladiators replaced with sputtering engines and leather-helmeted riders. You wander in your dream beneath floodlights blazing across arches. Fascist banners hang heavy, the crowd roaring once again, though not for gladiators but for speeches booming through microphones. Mussolini gestures from a podium, his voice echoing against the same stones where emperors once waved. The Colosseum doesn't resist. It simply absorbs another layer of performance, another mass of power. Historians still argue whether Mussolini's use of ancient monuments preserved them with national pride or exploited them as hollow symbols. Perhaps both. The irony is sharp. The Colosseum, once Rome's great stage of imperial propaganda, was recycled centuries later into the same role by a modern dictator. Quirky note. During the 1940s, some Romans claimed the ruin acted like a talisman, protecting the city from heavier bombing. It was superstition, of course, but imagine huddling in the dark, listening to air raid sirens, glancing at the Colosseum silhouette and whispering that it had survived so much already. Surely it could keep standing. You step through the arena in your dream, hearing phantom echoes of boots marching, crowds chanting, speeches pounding. Then silence. The war ends, banners come down, and the Colosseum remains. Once more it has outlasted politics, propaganda, even bombs. As the night deepens, you look at its arches silhouetted against the starlit sky. Half the building is gone, yet still it serves as backdrop, as stage, as symbol, no matter who claims it. Emperors, popes, generals, dictators, they all leave. The ruin stays. You whisper into the quiet. History has a way of reusing the same stones for different scripts. And the Colosseum, scarred and stubborn, keeps playing every role. You rub the chill from your arms as the echoes of war fade. The Colosseum stands tall in your dream once more, but now its arches are lit not with fascist banners or torchlight, but with electric glow. The modern city hums around it. Buses rumble past, car horns echo, and tourists spill from hotels nearby. The ruin has become one of the world's most famous destinations, a postcard more recognizable than almost any other. Mainstream fact. Today, the Colosseum welcomes over 7 million visitors each year, making it the most visited monument in Italy. Quirky tidbit. In 2007, it was voted one of the new 7 wonders of the world, joining Machu Picchu and the Great Wall of China on a list that made Romans both proud and faintly amused. It took you people 2,000 years to notice? One guide reportedly joked. You wander in your dream among the crowds. Long lines snake around the outer ring. Selfie sticks jut like spears, and tour guides wave flags high above their groups. Children lick gelato. Couples argue over map directions, and vendors hawk bottled water with a shout. Un-Euro. The Colosseum has become Rome's busiest piazza, buzzing with life. Historians still argue whether mass tourism saves the ruin by funding restoration, or threatens it with wear and pollution. Each sneaker scuffs the stone a little more. Each flash photo adds to the strange theater of modern pilgrimage. Yet without visitors, the Colosseum will be just another quiet ruin, forgotten in weeds. Quirky note. In 2016, the Italian government approved a massive cleaning project for the Colosseum, funded not by taxes, but by a luxury fashion brand. Imagine gladiators rolling in their graves as a shoe company bankrolls the scrubbing of their arena. Still, the project revealed the amphitheater's travertine shining pale and bright once again, like a freshly polished bone. You sit on a bench, listening to the symphony of languages around you. English, Mandarin, Spanish, German, all weaving into one global chorus. The Colosseum has become less a Roman monument and more a human one, shared by the entire world. Half ruin or not, it belongs to everyone now. As the evening falls, floodlights blaze on, turning the arches gold against the deep blue sky. Couples lean on railings, snapping photos. Children gape wide-eyed. A group of students sketch hurriedly before the light fades. The crowd's murmur is soft in the roar of gladiators, but the energy feels oddly similar. Once again, thousands gather, eyes fixed inward, awed by the same circle of stone. You lean back, smiling faintly. The Colosseum has traded lions for lenses, emperors for Instagrammers, blood for hashtags. And yet, the essence is unchanged. It remains a stage, pulling the world into its embrace, demanding to be remembered. Half gone, half standing, it endures not as ruin, but as a living symbol of Rome, of endurance, of the strange human urge to gather, to cheer, to tell stories. And you whisper into the night, perhaps the Colosseum was never just Rome's. It was always ours. You stay seated on the cold stone as the modern crowd fades in your dream, the floodlights still bathing the arches in gold. But behind the shimmer lies urgency. The Colosseum has stood for nearly 2,000 years, yet everyday gravity, pollution, and time tug at its bones. And so the ruin hums with quiet work. Teams of preservationists laboring to keep half of it from becoming none of it. Mainstream fact. Modern preservation of the Colosseum involves constant monitoring, cleaning, and reinforcement. Engineers inject mortar into cracks. Archaeologists document every stone, and scaffolding seems to appear almost as often as tourists. Quirky tidbit. During a restoration in the 2010s, workers discovered graffiti carved by 19th century visitors, hearts, initials, even crude cartoons, layered right on top of ancient Roman inscriptions. Imagine Rome's greatest ruin covered with 2,000 years of doodles. You wander in your dream past scaffolding clinging to the outer rim. Workers in helmets and neon vests chip away moss, brush grime from marble, and stabilize leaning arches with steel supports. The clang of hammers and whir of drills echo through the corridors, mingling with the chatter of tourists. The Colosseum is part ruin, part construction site, forever unfinished. Historians still argue about the best methods to preserve it. Should restorers use modern concrete, risking a patchwork effect, or try to recreate ancient Roman recipes? Should crumbling arches be left raw for authenticity or reinforced for safety? Every decision feels like a tug of war between history and necessity. Quirky note. In 2021, Italy announced a plan to rebuild part of the arena floor using lightweight, retractable panels. The idea was to allow visitors to stand where gladiators once fought. Some cheered the innovation. Others muttered it was turning the ruin into a theme park. Imagine lining up for your turn to stand on brand new flooring in a 2,000-year-old death pit. Part solemn, part selfie opportunity. You lean on a railing, watching dust swirl in a shaft of sunlight. Preservation feels less like saving the Colosseum and more like slowing its surrender. Every crack filled today will open again tomorrow. Every scaffold taken down will rise again somewhere else. The ruin isn't just stone. It's a patient on permanent life support. And yet, there's something beautiful in that. Workers brush carefully. Archaeologists kneel with notebooks. Guides adjust explanations. All weaving net care around a monument that has outlived everyone who ever built or looted it. The Colosseum's survival isn't an accident. It's a collaboration across centuries. Romans who built too strong. Popes who hesitated to destroy. Scholars who dug. Workers who patched. Tourists who paid. Half gone, half saved, it endures through effort as much as luck. As the night deepens in your dream, the floodlights click off one by one. The ruin melts into shadow, scaffolding vanishing against the dark. You sit in the silence, realizing that preservation itself has become part of the Colosseum story. Not just what it was, not just what it lost, but what people still fight to keep. And you whisper into the cool air. Sometimes the greatest spectacle is simply refusing to disappear. You sit in the hush of your dream, watching the arches fade into shadow. 2,000 years weigh on the Colosseum, yet it still rises, jagged and stubborn. Half of it is gone, half remains, but all of it breathes. You realize now this ruin is less a building than a story told in stone. A story of power, of plunder, of poetry, of persistence. Mainstream fact. The Colosseum once seated 50,000, a marvel of engineering, propaganda, and spectacle. Quirky tidbit. Today, wildcats roam arches, prowling like miniature lions reclaiming their old kingdom. Tourists sometimes snap photos, convinced these scrappy cats are the arena's true heirs. Historians still argue whether the Colosseum's endurance proves Roman engineering genius, divine fate, or simply luck. Perhaps it's all three. You wander once more around its oval, imagining every age layered like paint. Emperors staging blood sports, popes sanctifying the stones, nobles turning arches into castles, looters carting away marble, botanists cataloging weeds, tourists snapping selfies. Each era claimed the Colosseum, and each left it both wounded and alive. You stop at the break in the southern wall. Through its absence, the night sky yawns wide. Stars glitter where stone once towered. You tilt your head, sensing that the missing half is as important as the standing half. Loss has become part of its beauty. Wholeness isn't required for eternity. You trace your fingers across the pockmarked stone, whispering the names of ghosts. Gladiators, slaves, masons, monks, vendors, tourists. The Colosseum has never been silent. It just changes its script. Tonight, in your dream, it speaks softly. Endurance is not perfection, but persistence. You sit down in the center of the arena floor, gazing upward at the fractured halo of arches. Wind brushes your face, carrying scents of dust, roses, and faraway bread. For a moment, the roar of crowds returns, then fades again, leaving only the breath of time. And you smile faintly, because though half of it is gone, the Colosseum remains not just in stone, but in every story told about it, including the one you now carry with you. And now, as the arches dissolve into night and the dream grows softer, you let your breath slow. The Colosseum, that fractured giant, drifts farther from sight, its stones dimming like coals after fire. The noise of tourists, the clang of hammers, the roars of gladiators, all of it fades into a hum no louder than your own heartbeat. The ruin rests, and so do you. You imagine lying on the arena floor, cool grass brushing your cheek, stars scattered above to the broken rim. The walls no longer loom with violence or grandeur. They simply cradle you, like a hand cupping a candle flame. The cracks and gaps seem less like wounds now, more like windows, openings where silence can slip in. In this softened light, the Colosseum is no longer half standing or half vanished. It is whole in its imperfection, whole in the way a lullaby is whole even when hummed off key. The jagged arches outline the sky, steady, protective, familiar. Your breath grows deeper, slower, like waves against the shore. You feel the weight of centuries lifting, leaving you lighter than dust. Whatever battles were fought here, whatever stones were stolen, they are quiet now. What remains is stillness. And so, as you close your eyes, you let the Colosseum's lesson linger. That survival isn't about being flawless. It's about enduring, about being enough, about standing through the tremors and the theft and the storms until night settles again. Let that thought wrap around you like a blanket. Let the silence stretch. Let the ruin rest. And you, too, can rest. Good night.